They say a king's legacy outlives his body. Mine outlived my body, my name, and even my species, which nobody ever properly warns you about. I built a kingdom with my own 2 hands. I bled for it, buried friends for it, and in the end, that very kingdom put a blade straight through my back. My name was Edric Thal, first king of Ashval, the man who stitched 7 warring clans into 1 banner and 1 crown through sheer stubbornness. Before the crown, I was just a farmer's 3rd son who happened to survive 3 border wars nobody expected him to walk away from alive. They called me the White Wolf King because of an old bloodline legend nobody in my family ever bothered confirming or denying out loud. My grandmother used to swear our line carried something older than royal blood, something tied to wolves and forests long before any crown existed. I never took the story seriously. Legends are useful for rallying soldiers before battle and useless for literally anything else, or so I thought. Turns out the legend was real. I just didn't learn that until after I died, woke up freezing, and noticed I now had 4 paws instead of 2 hands. I spent 12 years on that throne building roads, treaties, granaries, and a forest law that protected wildlands from being hunted for sport. My queen, Leora, used to tease me about caring more for wolves and forest boundaries than for half the noble houses begging for my attention. She wasn't wrong. I trusted forests more than I trusted most courtiers, and looking back, that was probably the smartest instinct I ever had. My son, Aldous, was barely past his 1st birthday when everything ended, too young to remember his father, as anything but a story someone told him later. The last thing I remember as a man was the smile on my closest friend's face while his dagger found the exact gap between my ribs. His name was Bastian Vire. Not my blood brother, but close enough that I trusted him with my crown, my armies, and apparently my own throat. We grew up together in the same drafty barracks, fought our first war side by side, and somewhere along the way I stopped checking his back for knives. Bastian commanded my armies for 9 years without a single complaint from me, which honestly should have made me more suspicious, not less. That was my mistake. Every kingdom built from nothing eventually attracts someone who decides it would look better under their own name instead. Bastian didn't just want my throne, he wanted my legacy scraped off the stone completely, the way you sand a name off a gravestone until nothing remains. So when his blade went in, he wasn't only killing a king, he was killing a symbol, and apparently symbols occasionally get reborn as something far smaller. I remember the throne room candles flickering, my own guards strangely absent, and Bastian leaning close enough to whisper before everything went dark. "The White Wolf dies tonight," he told me, almost gently, like he was doing me some kind of mercy I never asked for and certainly never deserved. I asked him why, with whatever breath I had left, and he only smiled wider, like the question itself was the most foolish thing I had ever said. "A kingdom only remembers the man who built it for so long," he told me, before it starts wondering who else might build it better and faster. My wife, Queen Leora, wasn't in that room. My infant son wasn't either. Small comfort, knowing Bastian apparently still needed living puppets to rule through. I didn't get to say goodbye to either of them. Kings rarely get goodbyes. We mostly just get betrayals, and occasionally, if we're unlucky, a sequel. The pain faded fast, replaced by a strange floating cold, like sinking into a lake at midnight with absolutely no intention of swimming back up. I expected darkness after that, or judgment, or simply nothing at all. Instead, I got wet fur, the smell of milk, and a heartbeat that wasn't mine. Apparently, whatever cosmic system handles second chances has a wicked sense of humor, because waking up blind and helpless was not the upgrade I imagined. For one disoriented moment, I genuinely believed I was hallucinating my own death. Then something nudged against my side, warm and breathing and alive. It took me an embarrassingly long time to realize I was now a newborn wolf pup, with the dead king's memories rattling loose inside a pup's tiny skull. Whoever designs reincarnation clearly has a sense of humor. Dying a king and waking up as the runt of a wolf litter is genuinely peak comedy. My mother was a lean, gray she-wolf with tired, watchful eyes, nursing 6 squirming pups who all seemed determined to shove me out of the warmest spot. I was smaller than my littermates, paler than my littermates, and apparently the only one cursed with a human's memories crammed into a pup's skull. For the first few weeks, survival meant exactly one thing: feeding before my brothers and sisters trampled me face first into the den's packed dirt. I lost that fight constantly. There's no royal decree that makes a newborn pup stronger than its littermates, no matter how hard I tried thinking one into existence. Weeks crawled by in that den, measured only by hunger, sleep, and the slow, horrifying realization of exactly how fragile this new body actually was. My fur came in pure white, not gray like my mother, not brindled like my siblings, blinding white like something had marked me on purpose from birth. The other pups noticed immediately. So did the rest of the pack, and white fur wasn't considered rare out of admiration. It usually meant trouble instead. An old gray-muzzled wolf named Var, my mother's mate and the pack's alpha male, took one look at me and his lip curled like he'd just smelled something rotting. He didn't kill me outright. Alphas rarely waste good prey on their own bloodline, but he made it brutally clear I wasn't wanted anywhere near his shadow. His strongest pup from our litter, a thick-shouldered brute named Kor, decided early that the pale runt made excellent practice for sharpening his teeth. Kor knocked me into the mud more times that first season than Bastion's entire royal army managed against me across 3 full years of actual warfare. Here's the strange part about having a dead king's mind trapped inside a wolf cub's body. You remember strategy and patience, but can't use either one yet. So I did what any disgraced monarch reborn as a runt would logically do. I watched everything, said nothing, and waited for my body to finally catch up. There was an older wolf in the pack, too, a graying female named Yara, who had outlived 3 alphas and apparently trusted nobody's intentions fully. Yara watched me longer than the others did, the way old advisors watch a new face at court before deciding whether it's worth their attention at all. She never said a single thing to me directly that first season, but she also never let Kor corner me completely without drifting conveniently close by. Patience turned out to be the one royal skill that translated perfectly into fur and claws, because a king who survives court politics can survive a wolf den. By the time my eyes properly opened, I had already mapped every weak point in our pack's hierarchy, the same way I once mapped weaknesses in rival noble houses. Kor was strong, but completely predictable. My mother was tired, but endlessly watchful. Var ruled purely through fear, which meant his throne sat on sand. None of that mattered much yet. I was still a clumsy pup who could barely walk straight, hiding old ambition inside a body that couldn't even catch a beetle. The first time I actually caught a beetle, 3 months later, I felt prouder than the day I signed the treaty that ended the border wars permanently. Small victories matter differently when you're 4 inches tall and competing against siblings who outweigh you by half again your own body weight. One pup in the litter, a smaller gray female named Senna, was the only one who never piled onto me during feeding time or play fighting in the den. She nudged scraps toward me whenever nobody else was watching, studying me with curious amber eyes like she somehow sensed I didn't quite belong in that litter. Senna became, without either of us discussing it out loud, the closest thing I had to an ally in a den full of siblings who treated me like an inconvenience. I started paying attention to her the way I once paid attention to the few honest advisors left in my own court, which is to say very, very carefully. By midwinter, Senna and I had developed a quiet system. She distracted Kor with mock challenges while I slipped past him toward whatever food remained. It wasn't glamorous strategy. It barely qualifies as strategy at all. But it worked, and a king learns quickly that working plans beat clever ones every time. Months passed faster than expected. My legs grew steadier, my senses sharpened, and slowly the gap between me and Kor's strength started narrowing. I never beat Kor outright that first year. I just stopped losing as badly, which honestly felt like the wolf equivalent of winning a minor border skirmish. Var started noticing the shift too, though he never said anything about it directly, just watched me a half-second longer than he used to before looking away. Alphas notice shifting power long before anyone admits it out loud. I used to do the exact same thing, scanning noble faces during long council meetings. Yara finally spoke to me directly that spring. While I was nursing a torn ear from yet another scuffle, Kor had started over absolutely nothing important. "You think too much for a pup who can barely hunt rabbits," she said, settling beside me without waiting for permission, the way old wolves always do. I didn't answer her directly, mostly because admitting a dead king's memories were rattling around inside a wolf cub's skull seemed like a terrible opening line. She didn't push for an answer either. She just stayed close that evening, sharing warmth, the same quiet way Senna had been doing for months already. Between Senna's loyalty and Yara's watchful silence, I had somehow assembled a tiny, unofficial council, inside a den that barely tolerated my existence. It wasn't an army. It wasn't even close to an army. But every kingdom I ever built started exactly this small, with exactly this few people willing to stay close. I started practicing patience deliberately, the same way I once trained myself to sit through hours of boring trade disputes without showing irritation. Patience paid off faster in a wolf den than it ever did in a throne room, mostly because wolves get bored insulting the same target after a while. Kor eventually found new pups to torment once a second litter arrived that spring, and for the first time since birth, I got an entire week of relative peace. I used that week to actually learn how this body worked, testing how far I could run, how quietly I could move, how long I could hold still without breathing loudly. Stillness turned out to be its own kind of power. Most predators, including wolves apparently, struggle to notice something that simply refuses to move. I practiced that stillness obsessively, crouched in shadow near the den entrance, watching birds, beetles, and the occasional careless rabbit wander too close. The first rabbit I actually caught on my own felt better than any trade agreement I'd ever signed, and considering my old job, that's genuinely saying something. Senna laughed when she saw me dragging that rabbit back twice my own size, proud and ridiculous, tripping over my own paws the entire muddy way home. My mother allowed herself something close to a smile that evening too, watching her smallest pup finally bring something useful back to the den for once. Even Var grunted something that might have been approval, though, knowing him, it could have just as easily been mild indigestion from a poorly chosen meal. Either way, I'd take it. Small approvals build slowly into bigger ones, the same way small alliances eventually build entire kingdoms if you're patient enough. Then, one evening, chasing the smallest scrap of meat my littermates had left behind, something deep inside my chest woke up without any warning at all. A pulse of heat rolled through my body, faint but unmistakable. The exact pressure I used to feel standing on a battlefield right before the first horn sounded. My eyes weren't ordinary brown anymore. For one entire heartbeat, every pup nearby scrambled backward, staring at me like I'd suddenly grown a second head. Even Kor, who'd spent every single day proving exactly how much bigger and meaner he was, took one look at my glowing eyes and quietly backed off. Var himself stalked over, nostrils flaring wide, studying me with an expression I'd never once seen on a wolf's face, somewhere between hunger and outright fear. Yara was the only one who didn't flinch. She simply tilted her head, studying my eyes like she was confirming something she'd already privately suspected. Whatever that pulse was, it didn't last long. The heat faded fast, my eyes went back to plain brown, and the pack slowly remembered I was still just the runt. But for 3 full seconds, every wolf in that den had looked at me exactly the way my own royal court used to look at me before a major battle, like I mattered. I didn't understand what had actually happened yet. I only knew one thing for certain. Whatever was buried inside this small white body, it was still entirely mine. Senna asked me afterward, in her own quiet way, why my eyes had done that. I told her I honestly didn't know, which for once wasn't even a convenient lie. Yara asked me the exact same question later that night, except she asked it like she already expected an answer I wasn't ready to give her yet. Privately, I suspected it had something to do with the old legend, the very bloodline story that had earned Bastion his perfect excuse for a royal purge. Somewhere out there, Bastion sat comfortably on a throne he stole, ordering hunting parties into the wilderness, certain the White Wolf was nothing but folklore. He had absolutely no idea his precious legend was currently learning to walk on 4 unsteady legs inside the weakest pup of an ordinary forest pack. He would find out eventually. Everyone always does, given enough time. For now, though, I had a den to survive and an entire hierarchy left to quietly climb. My mother began watching me differently after that night, too, the same careful way she watched storm clouds gathering early over distant mountains. She never said anything directly about it. Wolves rarely do. But she started leaving slightly larger portions near my spot, just often enough that nobody else noticed. I appreciated it more than she could possibly understand, considering the last time anyone fed me purely out of care, I'd technically been sitting on a throne. Yara started teaching me things too, after that night, things she claimed were just ordinary pack lessons, but felt suspiciously like deliberate training. How to read wind direction before a hunt, how to judge a stranger's intentions by the angle of their ears, how to stay invisible in plain daylight. I soaked it up faster than any tutor at court ever managed teaching me statecraft, mostly because failing these particular lessons meant actual consequences. By the time autumn arrived, I had pieced together enough scattered scent trails and overheard howls to understand exactly where our territory sat on the map. We denned in the old Greymoor woodland, less than 2 days' run from the outer walls of Ashvale, the kingdom I'd personally spent a decade building from scratch. That proximity wasn't comforting in the slightest. If anything, it made every distant horn or torchlight glow through the trees feel like a countdown. Older wolves in the pack occasionally mentioned hunters passing through years before, but always in small, scattered numbers, never organized, never hunting wolves specifically. That changed the autumn I turned roughly 1 year old, when the scent of armored men and trained hounds started showing up at our territory's edge weekly. I caught fragments of human conversation during cautious scouting trips, hiding in brush close enough to hear voices, but far enough away to bolt instantly. One hunter mentioned a royal decree straight from the capital, something about cleansing the old forests of cursed bloodlines before a coronation anniversary. Cursed bloodlines. I nearly laughed out loud, if pups could laugh properly, because I already knew exactly which bloodline they meant before he finished speaking. White wolves. The old legend tied directly to my own crown, the same legend Bastion apparently decided to weaponize the moment he sat on my stolen throne. He hadn't just taken my kingdom, he'd twisted my own legend into a monstrous story, then ordered soldiers to hunt down anything that looked like proof I'd existed. Somewhere out there, my own kingdom was now paying soldiers to kill creatures like me, because the man who murdered me was apparently terrified of what I represented. I'd spent my entire human life building something I genuinely believed would outlast me. Instead, it got quietly repurposed into a very efficient extermination program. Another scout's conversation mentioned something else too, something about the old queen being kept quietly under guard inside her own former palace wing. Leora was still alive then, at least as of that conversation, which meant somewhere in that stolen palace, someone still remembered the world before Bastion. My son, if he was even still called Aldous, would be old enough now to walk and talk, raised entirely inside a court built on a lie about his own father. That thought hurt worse than the betrayal itself, honestly, picturing a boy growing up believing his father was either a monster or a forgotten footnote. That realization should have broken something inside me. Instead, lying curled in the dirt with a pup's heart hammering, I felt something colder take its place. Rage, certainly, plenty of it simmering underneath everything else. But beneath the rage sat something far more useful, a plan slowly taking shape, heartbeat by heartbeat. If Bastion wanted to hunt the White Wolf so badly, fine. I would eventually give him exactly what he was looking for, just nowhere near the timeline he expected. First, though, I needed to survive, being the runt of an ordinary wolf litter long enough to actually grow into whatever this body was capable of becoming. That turned out to be a far bigger problem than rebuilding an entire kingdom, mostly because kings rarely have to physically wrestle their own siblings for scraps. I shared what little I'd overheard with Senna one quiet evening, watching her amber eyes narrow the same way mine used to narrow over a war council map. "If men are hunting white fur," she said slowly, "maybe you should stay close to the den until you're stronger." It was the smartest advice I'd gotten in 2 lifetimes. I didn't take it, obviously, because royal stubbornness apparently survives reincarnation just fine, unlike literally everything else about my old body. 3 nights after that overheard conversation, the hunting party finally found our territory for real, and the whole pack paid for my curiosity in full. It started small, just a strange stillness in the forest that even the younger pups noticed, the kind of quiet that usually means every bird already fled. Yara caught the smell first, lifting her muzzle sharply toward the eastern ridge, every muscle in her old body suddenly alert in a way I hadn't seen before. "Men," she said quietly, "and metal, and something else underneath it, something sharper than ordinary steel that made even Var's ears flatten instantly." Arrows hissed through the underbrush before any of us even caught the men's scent properly. That's how quietly this particular hunting party had moved in. My mother grabbed 2 pups by the scruff in an instant and ran toward the deep ravine, while Var spun toward the noise, every muscle in his body coiling tight. "Run!" she barked at the rest of us, her voice cracking with something I had never heard from her before, pure, undiluted fear, the kind no alpha's mate shows easily. I scrambled toward the den's back exit, Senna pressed tight against my side, both of us small and fast enough to slip through gaps the older wolves couldn't. Yara stayed behind for 1 extra heartbeat, shoving a confused younger pup toward the ravine path, before finally turning to follow the rest of us out. Behind us, Var let out a roar that shook loose snow from the nearest branches, throwing himself directly at 3 armored hunters guarding the main entrance. I didn't watch the rest of that fight directly. I heard it instead, through brush and distance, which somehow made every sound feel far worse than seeing it. Steel against claw, a man's shout cut short, then silence. The specific kind of silence that only follows something large finally hitting frozen ground. Var didn't win that fight. Alphas rarely do against trained steel and crossbows, no matter how much fury they throw at the men standing in front of them. I watched, through a gap between 2 fallen logs, the wolf who'd hated me his entire life die trying to buy time for a pack that barely tolerated him back. There was no glory in it, no dramatic last stand worth singing about later. Just an old alpha buying his pack a few extra seconds with everything he had left. Kor ran past my hiding spot moments later, blood streaming from a shallow gash along his shoulder, and for 1 strange instant he looked genuinely terrified. It was the first time since I'd been born that Kor looked at anything the way I imagined he should have been looking at the world all along, small and mortal. A second wave of hunters cut off the ravine path, before half the pack could reach it, forcing everyone to scatter in directions nobody had planned for. Senna and I ended up pressed flat behind a fallen log, close enough to a hunter's boot that I could count the individual stitches along his leather sole. I made a decision in that exact moment that I'm still not entirely sure was wise, but royal instinct apparently doesn't fully switch off just because you're small. I bit down hard on the man's ankle strap, just enough to startle him without drawing real blood, then bolted the second his attention dropped toward his boot. It worked exactly long enough for Senna to slip past him in the confusion, which honestly was the entire point of doing something that reckless in the first place. We both ran until our lungs burned, until the shouting behind us faded into ordinary forest noise, until the only sound left was our own ragged breathing. By the time the horns finally faded into the distance, half our pack was scattered, dead, or simply gone, swallowed by smoke, torchlight, and frozen mud. My mother found Senna and me huddled together near the ravine just before dawn, said absolutely nothing, and pressed her body tightly against both of us. Yara arrived shortly after, limping slightly, 1 ear torn, but very much alive, which felt like the first genuinely good news of an otherwise terrible night. Kor showed up last, dragging one back leg slightly, refusing to meet anyone's eyes, especially mine, especially after running past me without stopping once. I should have felt relief at simply surviving the night. Instead, all I felt was that same cold, calculating fury I used to feel reading reports of burned villages. These men weren't hunting monsters out of necessity. They were hunting fear itself, dressed up neatly in royal decrees, funded by a treasury I had personally filled. My mother counted heads quietly at dawn, the same way I once counted survivors after a border skirmish, refusing to let her face show anything until she finished. 3 pups gone, 2 older wolves gone, Var gone. The pack that had barely tolerated me a year earlier had just lost nearly a third of its entire number. Nobody mentioned crowning a new alpha that morning. Grief apparently outranks politics, even among wolves, at least for the first few hours after a loss like that. I understood that silence better than anyone in that ravine. I'd sat through exactly that kind of silence myself, after battles I'd ordered and somehow survived. Somewhere in that scattered hunting party, one man knelt close enough to our old den that I could clearly see the crest stitched proudly over his heart. It was the crest of Ashvale, my own crest, designed by my own hand decades ago, now sewn onto the cloaks of men hunting wolves through forests I once swore to protect. He wasn't searching for wolves anymore, though. He was kneeling beside something half buried in the roots near our den, brushing frost off it with one glove. A stone, old and weathered, carved with a sigil only someone trained in royal heraldry would recognize at a glance. My own sigil, carved long before this litter existed. I had carved that exact stone myself, back when I was still a man, marking the boundary of land I'd promised the old forest clans would never be hunted on. Watching some stranger's gloved fingers trace lines I had carved with my own human hands felt stranger than almost anything else that had happened since I died. The hunter's eyes went wide as he traced the symbol a second time, clearly comparing it against something memorized and taught to him carefully in advance. He called out a name to his captain, low and urgent, a name I hadn't heard spoken aloud since the exact night Bastion's dagger had found my ribs in that throne room. Thal, he said, just once, like the word itself might bite him. Every soldier standing near that fallen stone turned sharply toward their own captain's silence. Their captain crouched beside the stone himself, studying the old sigil for a long, uncomfortable moment before finally muttering something none of us could hear. From my hiding place in the brush, pressed tight against Senna and my exhausted mother, I watched my own kingdom's soldiers stumble onto the truth by pure accident. They hadn't come looking for proof I had ever existed. They had come looking for cursed wolves to cull on schedule before some meaningless coronation anniversary. Instead, they had found a sigil stone carved by a dead king's own hand, sitting practically beside the den of a pup whose fur was exactly the wrong color to ignore. The captain stood slowly, brushing frost off his knees, and gave an order I couldn't quite hear over the wind still rattling through the bare winter branches. 2 soldiers immediately began scouting the perimeter of our den, with far more care than they'd shown clearing any other territory that entire autumn. I had no idea yet how much that captain actually understood, or how quickly word of an old sigil stone would travel back toward Bastion's stolen throne room. What I did know, watching torchlight flicker against that ancient carved stone, was that hiding quietly inside this body had just become significantly harder. Yara noticed the men lingering too, longer than any ordinary hunting party should, and her ears stayed flat against her skull the entire time we watched them. "They are not looking for wolves anymore," she murmured, low enough that only Senna and I could hear it over the wind moving through the bare branches above us. I almost told her the truth right then. The words sat right behind my teeth, ready to spill out, before old royal caution finally clamped my jaw shut instead. Some secrets get heavier the longer you carry them. This particular one had been heavy since the moment I first opened my eyes inside a wolf cub's body. The hunting party finally withdrew before midday, carrying their dead, leaving the sigil stone exactly where they'd found it, undisturbed but clearly marked. They tied a strip of red cloth around the nearest tree, a marker I recognized instantly from old border surveys, the kind used to flag something for a return visit. A return visit. Of course, there would be a return visit. Nothing about Bastion's reign had ever struck me as the kind that simply let mysteries sit unresolved. My mother led what remained of the pack deeper into Greymoor that same afternoon, putting as much distance as possible between us and that marked tree. Nobody spoke much during that long, exhausted march. Grief and fear apparently make for very quiet company, even among creatures built for howling. Kor walked beside me for most of that march, which hadn't happened once in over a year, not since the day I'd first opened my eyes in that crowded den. He didn't apologize. Wolves don't really do apologies the way humans do. He just stayed close, occasionally glancing sideways like he was reconsidering something. I'd take quiet reconsideration over open hostility any day. Kings learn fast that former enemies make surprisingly useful allies once circumstances shift hard enough. By nightfall, we'd settled into a shallow cave system Yara remembered from decades earlier, cramped but defensible, tucked behind a wall of frozen brambles. My mother finally allowed herself to grieve once the entrance was sealed with brush. A low, broken sound I'd never heard from any wolf, royal or otherwise. Senna pressed against my side that night without saying anything at all, and for once I didn't try filling the silence with any clever royal observation. Some moments just need silence. I learned that lesson too late as a king, sitting through too many councils where silence would have served better than speeches. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of exhaustion, grief, and the constant low hum of fear that follows any pack after losing this much at once. Nobody formally challenged for the empty alpha position right away. Most of the survivors were too busy simply remembering how to eat and sleep properly again. I started hunting more deliberately during those quiet days, applying every lesson Yara had drilled into me, every trick I'd practiced alone near the den. My first real kill, a half-grown hare caught through patience rather than luck, fed 3 pups that night who hadn't eaten properly in over 2 days. Nobody crowned me anything for it. Wolves don't really do ceremonies for small kindnesses, but my mother's eyes lingered on me a little longer that evening. Cor started following along on these hunts too, watching my technique closely, asking nothing out loud but clearly absorbing every single detail anyway. I taught him the stillness trick eventually, the one Yara had taught me, mostly because a fed, capable Cor was infinitely more useful than a resentful one. He caught his own hare 2 days later, clumsy but successful. And for the first time since birth, he actually looked at me without an ounce of contempt. Senna noticed the shift too, nudging me with her shoulder one evening, amusement flickering behind those familiar, curious amber eyes of hers. "Look at you, building yourself a little kingdom out of hares and hunting lessons," she said. And I genuinely couldn't tell if she meant it as a joke or not. Maybe I was. Old habits apparently survive death just fine, even when the only throne available happens to be a flat rock near a cramped winter cave. Yara watched all of this unfold with the particular satisfaction of someone who'd clearly expected exactly this outcome from the very beginning. She started deferring to me on small decisions too, which direction to scout, which prey trail looked promising. Decisions she'd normally make herself. My mother never said it outright, but she stopped hovering over my shoulder during hunts, the unmistakable sign of a parent finally trusting a child's judgment. None of this made me alpha. Nobody used that word, and I genuinely didn't want it yet. Not in a body this young, not with a target like Bastion's hunters still circling. I spent most nights awake anyway, replaying the captain's face beside that stone, turning the word Thal over and over like a coin I couldn't stop flipping. If that captain reported what he'd found, Bastion would know within days that someone, or something, connected to the old king had survived in that forest. He wouldn't assume a wolf pup, obviously. Nobody sane assumes reincarnation as their first explanation for a missing rival's lingering influence on a map. But Bastion had never struck me as a man who left loose threads unpulled, not when he'd planned a betrayal as carefully and patiently as he'd planned mine. Whatever he suspected, he would send people back. More soldiers, more decrees, more excuses dressed up as royal policy to justify burning down an entire forest. I thought about the other sigil stones too, scattered through forests I'd personally surveyed decades earlier, each one marking land under royal protection. If hunters found this one by accident, they would eventually stumble onto others, especially if Bastion started actively searching once suspicion took root. Some of those marked forests held other packs entirely, wolves who had never met me, never heard of Asheville, completely unaware they were sitting on buried history. That thought planted something uncomfortable in my chest, the realization that surviving quietly in one cave wasn't going to be nearly enough protection for long. Yara mentioned once that Greymoor wasn't the only large pack territory within a few days' run, just the only one she'd bothered keeping track of personally. A pack to the north, near the old salt cliffs, supposedly numbered twice our size, led by an alpha, Yara remembered as cautious rather than cruel. Another pack further east, guarded territory close enough to a smaller human village, that conflict between them apparently flared up every few seasons. None of that mattered immediately, but I filed every scrap of it away anyway, the same way I once filed away minor border disputes long before they became real wars. A king learns early that today's irrelevant detail is tomorrow's emergency. And apparently that lesson survives reincarnation just as stubbornly as everything else. For now, Greymoor was small enough to manage and quiet enough to heal in, which was exactly the kind of unglamorous start every real comeback actually requires. I needed to be stronger before that happened. Not eventually stronger. Not someday stronger. Actually, meaningfully stronger, and soon, before the next visit arrived. That pulse of heat in my chest, the strange flash in my eyes, whatever that had been, it was the only proof I had that this body could still become something more. I just didn't know yet how to summon it on command, how to control it, or whether trying too hard to force it might somehow make things worse instead of better. Yara found me still awake near dawn one of those nights, staring at nothing, and settled beside me without a word, the same way she had after my eyes first changed. "You're not just a clever pup, are you?" she said eventually, more statement than question, the exact tone I used to use confronting suspicious court advisors. I considered lying again. I'd gotten quite good at lying small, harmless lies these past 2 years. This particular lie, though, refused to come out cleanly. "No," I told her finally, surprising myself more than her. "I am not just a clever pup." That admission felt heavier and lighter than anything I'd said in years. She didn't ask what I actually was. Old wolves, apparently, know better than to demand answers that someone clearly isn't ready to hand over just yet. "Whatever you are," she said instead, "this pack needs someone willing to think 3 steps ahead right now, and you've been doing exactly that since birth." It wasn't a crown, it wasn't an army, it wasn't even close to the kingdom I'd lost. But it was something, and something is always the proper place to begin again. The White Wolf King was supposed to be dead, buried, and conveniently forgotten under a story about cursed bloodlines deserving total extermination. Instead, here I was, alive in the smallest, weakest body imaginable, watching the very kingdom I built circle steadily closer to a truth nobody was ready for. Bastion wanted a legend he could safely hunt and kill on command whenever it suited him. What he was actually about to get back was a king who had already survived him once. Whatever happened next in that forest, one thing felt absolutely certain. As that red strip of cloth fluttered, marking a tree, marking a promise to return. The kingdom I had built with my own 2 hands had just stumbled onto the very first piece of proof that the White Wolf King never actually left at all. Honestly, though, would you have stayed quiet and hidden in that den? Or trusted Yara with the whole truth right then? Tell me in the comments, and I will see you in part 2. Weeks passed inside that cramped cave before anything close to normal life returned to what remained of our scattered, grieving little pack. My mother's name was Marin, something I'd never bothered learning properly as a newborn pup, too busy surviving to ask polite questions. Marin held the pack together through sheer stubbornness those first weeks, refusing to let grief turn into the kind of paralysis that gets everyone killed. She never claimed the alpha title outright, mostly because claiming titles apparently matters less to wolves than simply doing the actual work involved. Yara handled scouting and old forest knowledge. Kor handled muscle and intimidation. Senna handled the younger pups nobody else had patience for. I handled, unofficially, almost everything else, the same exhausting catch-all role I used to perform for an entire kingdom from behind a much bigger desk. Nobody voted on any of this. Wolves don't really vote. Roles simply settled into place the way water finds the lowest available path through stone. By midwinter, the cave felt less like a hiding spot and more like an actual home, cramped and cold but stubbornly, defiantly still standing. I grew faster that winter than I had any right to, my legs lengthening, my chest broadening, my fur thickening into something that finally looked dangerous. Kor noticed the change first, eyeing me sideways during one of our now regular sparring sessions, with something that almost resembled respect. "You're not the runt anymore," he said one evening, like the observation surprised him more than it should have after watching it happen gradually for months. "I never was just the runt," I told him, which earned me an unimpressed snort and a much harder shoulder check than I was honestly expecting that night. Our sparring matches stopped feeling like punishment somewhere around midwinter and started feeling like something closer to genuine training instead. Kor fought with raw power and questionable patience. I fought with patience and questionable raw power. Together we made each other noticeably better. Senna watched these matches from the cave entrance most evenings, occasionally offering commentary neither of us had asked for but both secretly wanted. "You two fight like brothers now," she told us once, and for once, Kor didn't immediately deny it the way he would have a year earlier without hesitation. I let that comment sit longer than it probably deserved. Brothers? After everything Bastion's betrayal taught me, that word still made something in my chest ache. Marin kept a careful, quiet distance from me most days, watching from a respectful length, the way a parent watches a child who's started outgrowing guidance. She still fed me first some nights, though, an old habit neither of us mentioned out loud, both of us pretending it was simply convenient timing instead. I caught her once staring at my eyes in firelight, searching for that strange golden flicker that had appeared exactly twice since my very first season. It hadn't happened a third time yet, not for lack of trying on my part, though I'd mostly stopped trying after nearly setting my own tail on fire once. Patience, Yara reminded me constantly. Whatever lives inside you doesn't answer to impatience, no matter how royal or stubborn that impatience happens to be. She'd started saying things like that more openly since the night I'd admitted I wasn't just a clever pup, though she never pushed for the full explanation. I appreciated that restraint more than she probably realized. Some truths need time to be spoken properly, and mine still felt dangerously unfinished. The red cloth marker on that distant tree haunted every quiet moment that winter, a small, fluttering promise that our peace had a clearly visible expiration date. I sent Kor and Yara to check on it twice that season. each time returning with the same unsettling report, untouched, undisturbed, still patiently waiting. Whoever tied that cloth wasn't in a hurry. That should have comforted me. Instead, it felt like watching a slow fuse burn toward something I couldn't see yet. Spring eventually arrived anyway, the way it always does, indifferent to whatever quiet dread happened to be simmering inside one particular white wolf. With spring came longer days, easier hunting, and finally enough breathing room for Yara to start telling stories she'd clearly been holding back. She told them carefully, the way old advisors release information, one piece at a time, gauging reaction before deciding whether more was actually wise. The first white wolf wasn't born a wolf at all, she told me one warm evening, settling into the cave entrance like she was preparing for a long story. Old legend claims he was a man once, a king who loved these forests so completely that something ancient finally decided to grant his blood a permanent home in them. I kept my expression carefully neutral, which apparently fooled exactly nobody, judging by the amused way Yara's ears flicked sideways at me. The legend says his bloodline doesn't simply reincarnate randomly, she continued, ignoring my poorly hidden reaction entirely. It chooses, deliberately, every single time. Chooses what, exactly? I asked, already suspecting I wasn't going to enjoy whatever answer came next out of her weathered, knowing old mouth. Chooses someone who still has unfinished business in the world they left behind, she said simply, watching me with an expression far too understanding for comfort. I didn't answer that directly. Some silences say more than words ever could, and apparently Yara had become fluent in reading exactly that kind of silence. The legend also claims the bloodline grows stronger, near places that mattered to the previous life, she added almost offhandedly, like it was incidental detail. Places like thrones, I said before I could stop myself, immediately regretting how much that single sentence probably revealed about everything I'd been hiding. Yara didn't look surprised. If anything, she looked relieved, like a piece of some private puzzle had finally clicked quietly into place inside her own head. Ashvale, she said, not as a question, just a flat statement laid carefully on the ground between us like a stone she'd been carrying for longer than I realized. I didn't deny it. There seemed little point denying anything to someone who'd apparently suspected the truth, since the first night my eyes turned gold. How long have you known, I asked, and she actually laughed, a dry, rusty sound I hadn't heard from her even once during that entire brutal winter. Known is a strong word, she said. Suspected, since roughly the moment a newborn pup started out thinking wolves, 3 times his own actual age. She told me more that night than she had during our entire previous year together, legends about the bloodline's strength growing through proximity and purpose. The closer the bloodline gets to its old unfinished business, the stronger it apparently grows, like a fire finally finding the exact fuel it always needed. Asheville sat barely 2 days run away. According to her own legend, that proximity alone should have been quietly feeding whatever slept inside my chest. Maybe that explained the 2 flickers already. Maybe it explained why they'd happened during moments that mattered. Fear, threat, the presence of my own crest. The legend also warned something else, Yara added carefully. Watching my reaction the way a healer watches a patient before delivering difficult news. The bloodline apparently fully wakes only once. Completely, irreversibly. Usually at the exact moment its unfinished business finally comes within reach. Within reach? Meaning what, exactly? I asked, though some old royal instinct already suspected exactly where this particular sentence was heading. Meaning standing close enough to whatever you lost, she said quietly. Close enough to see it, smell it, remember every detail of losing it in the first place. Ashvale's walls then. My own stolen throne room, the exact spot where Bastion's blade had found my ribs all those years and one entire lifetime ago. That should have terrified me more than it actually did. Instead, it felt strangely like finally being handed a map after months of wandering blind in fog. I didn't tell Kor or Senna what Yara had shared that night, not yet, mostly because some truths need testing privately before they're handed to others. Instead, I threw myself into training with a focus that apparently startled even Kor, who'd started taking our sparring matches considerably more seriously. We practiced every morning before the rest of the pack properly woke. Trading lessons neither of us had words for, just instinct sharpening against instinct. Kor taught me raw power, the kind that comes from simply committing fully to every single strike without hesitation or unnecessary overthinking. I taught him patience, the kind that wins fights before they even properly start, the kind every successful siege I'd ever commanded had relied on completely. By early summer, neither of us reliably won these matches anymore. We just traded advantages back and forth like 2 evenly matched, exhausted commanders. Senna trained separately, favoring speed and misdirection over raw strength, the same instincts that had once helped both of us slip past armed hunters. She caught me watching her practice one afternoon and smirked, the particular smirk that meant she'd noticed something I hadn't intended for her to notice. Thinking about recruiting me for something, she asked, settling beside me with the easy confidence of someone who already half suspected the honest answer. Maybe, I admitted, surprising myself with how easily that single honest word slipped out around someone who'd earned exactly that much honesty by now. She didn't push further that day, just nodded slowly, filing the admission away the same careful, patient way she filed away nearly everything else. Senna had grown into something genuinely formidable that year, fast, clever, and utterly unwilling to back down from anything smaller than an actual mountain. Watching her spar against Kor one evening, I caught myself thinking, entirely against my will, that she would have made an excellent royal commander. That thought arrived with an uncomfortable amount of warmth attached to it, warmth I quickly filed away under problems future me would eventually deal with. Mara noticed the shift in our little group too, the three of us increasingly inseparable, training together, hunting together, planning together constantly. She mentioned once, half joking, that watching us felt like watching some strange, tiny royal court assemble itself out of fur, teeth, and stubborn loyalty. I laughed it off at the time. Looking back, she wasn't entirely wrong, and that realization probably should have unsettled me far more than it actually did. Yara joined our training sessions occasionally too, less to spar and more to correct small mistakes none of the three of us had noticed making ourselves. "Stop thinking like a soldier and start thinking like a king," she told me once, sharply, after watching me throw away a clear advantage out of pure impatience. I bristled at that correction more than I expected, mostly because she was completely, infuriatingly right, the exact same mistake I'd made constantly at court. "Soldiers win single fights," she continued. "Kings win the entire war by knowing exactly which fights are even worth having in the first place." That lesson stuck harder than any sparring bruise ever could, mostly because it was the exact lesson Bastion had apparently understood better than I had. He hadn't beaten me in open combat. He'd beaten me through patience, timing, and an absolute willingness to wait years for the perfect single opportunity. If I wanted any real chance against him eventually, I needed that same patience, scaled up to match whatever this bloodline was slowly becoming capable of. By midsummer, I'd stopped thinking of Greymore as merely a hiding place and started quietly treating it like the first real foundation of something bigger. Not a kingdom yet, not even close. But foundations rarely look impressive while they're being laid, and I'd built enough of them to recognize one forming. The first sign of trouble that summer wasn't human at all. It arrived instead on four legs, hungry, desperate, and pushed completely out of patience. Yara caught the scent first during a routine scouting run. An unfamiliar pack marking trees well inside what we'd quietly considered our own territory. "Strangers," she reported back, tense in a way I'd rarely seen from her. Larger pack, smaller territory, and judging by the scent, considerably more desperate. "Desperate packs make dangerous neighbors," she added, the kind of flat warning that comes from someone who'd clearly survived exactly this situation before. We tracked the newcomers cautiously over the following days, learning their numbers, their movement patterns, and eventually their alpha's actual name. "Drask," Yara reported, an alpha she vaguely remembered from decades earlier, leading a pack that had apparently lost their original territory entirely. "Lost it how?" I asked, though some sinking certainty already suspected exactly what kind of loss had pushed an entire pack this far from familiar ground. "Hunters," Yara confirmed grimly. "A purge, further south, burned out an entire valley those wolves had called home for longer than anyone could properly remember. There it was again, Bastion's reach extending far past anything I'd originally imagined, displacing entire packs that had never even heard the name Ashval. Drask's pack needed territory to survive the coming winter, and unfortunately for everyone involved, Greymore looked exactly like the nearest available option. Kor's immediate instinct was straightforward and entirely predictable. Meet them at the border, show enough teeth that they'd reconsider pushing any further. "That's how wolves usually settle this," he told me, not unkindly, just stating an obvious fact I apparently needed reminding of after too many seasons among humans. "Maybe," I told him, "but a fight that weakens both packs leaves everyone more vulnerable, right when human hunters are circling closer than ever before." Kor didn't love that reasoning, but he respected it enough to hold off, mostly because every single plan I'd suggested that year had worked out reasonably well. I requested a parley instead, something Yara informed me wolves technically don't really do, though apparently desperate enough alphas occasionally make exceptions. Drask agreed to meet on neutral ground near the territory border, bringing exactly 2 escorts, the same number I brought, an old courtly habit dying hard. He was larger than Var had been, scarred along one side, with a particular exhausted wariness of someone who'd already lost more than he could afford to lose. "You're young to be speaking for a pack this size," he said, sizing me up with obvious skepticism that honestly felt almost nostalgic after years of nobles doing the same. "I'm not the alpha," I told him honestly. "I'm just the one who suggested talking before anyone here loses something neither of us can actually afford to lose." That answer seemed to interest him more than any show of strength would have, the same way honesty occasionally disarmed suspicious nobles better than threats ever did. I offered him the Eastern Ridge, territory Greymore barely used anyway, in exchange for a clear boundary and a promise neither pack would test the other's patience. He studied me for a long, uncomfortable moment, clearly weighing pride against the much simpler arithmetic of hungry pups waiting back at his own temporary camp. Why would you offer anything to strangers, who could have simply taken it by force instead of asking politely for something you didn't actually have to give? Because strangers who feel given something fairly rarely come back looking for more later, I told him, while strangers who take by force always eventually do. That was a lesson learned the hard way governing an actual kingdom, watching generous treaties outlast harsh ones decade after stubborn, complicated decade. Drask accepted the offer eventually, reluctantly, the particular reluctance of someone who'd expected violence, and found something far more inconvenient instead. Kor seemed almost disappointed there hadn't been a fight, though he relaxed considerably once it became clear we'd gained territory without losing any wolves. Senna found the entire negotiation hilarious, for reasons she refused to fully explain, though she kept calling me Your Majesty under her breath for days afterward. Yara just watched the whole exchange with quiet satisfaction, the exact expression of someone watching a lesson finally land exactly where she'd intended it to. You handled that like someone who's done it 100 times before, she said afterward. Not quite a question. Just another stone laid carefully between us. Maybe closer to 1,000 times, I admitted, which made her laugh again, that same rare, rusty sound that was slowly becoming less rare with every passing month. Drask's pack settled the eastern ridge within the week, and within a month, scouts from both packs had started sharing information almost without official instruction. The peace lasted exactly until the first frost, which is roughly when the red cloth marker finally stopped being merely a distant theoretical threat. Drask's scouts spotted them first, organized riders moving along the old forest road, far more disciplined than any hunting party we'd encountered previously. Yara confirmed it personally, returning pale and tense from a scouting run she'd insisted on conducting herself, despite my objections about the risk involved. New leader this time, she reported. Not the same captain from last year, someone colder, more methodical, traveling with hounds trained specifically for tracking. His name, according to careful eavesdropping near their camp, was Huntmaster Dorian Krell, dispatched directly from the capital for this exact assignment. The capital. Ashvale itself. Bastion had apparently decided the sigil stone discovery warranted sending someone considerably more dangerous than ordinary soldiers. Krell's hounds weren't ordinary hunting dogs either, Yara added grimly. Trained specifically to track bloodline scent, whatever that actually meant in practice. Bloodline scent. The phrase settled into my chest like a stone dropped into still water, ripples spreading toward conclusions I desperately didn't want to reach. If those hounds could somehow track whatever made my blood different, hiding inside an ordinary wolf pack wasn't going to remain a viable strategy much longer. We moved the pack further into Greymoor's deepest sections that same week, abandoning the cramped winter cave for somewhere considerably harder to stumble upon. Marin didn't argue the relocation once, recognizing exactly the kind of threat Yara's description implied, even without fully understanding why it mattered so much. Kor volunteered immediately to help scout Krell's movements directly, an offer I accepted reluctantly, mostly because refusing him outright would have insulted him. Senna insisted on joining that scouting run too, refusing to let either of us argue her out of it using anything resembling reasonable, calm logic. The three of us tracked Krell's party for 2 careful days, staying far enough back that even trained hounds shouldn't have caught a usable trace of us. Krell himself looked exactly as unsettling as his reputation suggested, lean, precise, watching the forest with a particular focus of someone hunting something specific. He revisited the sigil stone personally on the second day, kneeling exactly where the previous captain had knelt a full year earlier, studying it just as carefully. This time he brought tools, careful measurements, sketches transferred onto parchment with disturbing, methodical precision for something supposedly just a rumor. Whoever ordered this, one of his men muttered nearby, certainly isn't treating it like an idle rumor anymore, not with this much careful attention involved. Krell silenced him with a single sharp look, the universal gesture of someone who clearly didn't appreciate subordinates, speaking honestly in front of strangers. We retreated before the hounds could circle close enough to risk detection, though one animal lifted its head sharply just as we slipped back into deeper brush. That moment of near detection rattled Senna more than she wanted to admit afterward. Her usual confident stride, noticeably tighter the entire walk back home. Kor stayed unusually quiet too, processing something I suspected went well beyond simple fear, more like genuine recognition of exactly how outmatched we currently were. I felt that same recognition settle uncomfortably in my own chest, the particular cold clarity that comes from finally seeing an enemy's full capability up close. Krell wasn't hunting wolves out of royal obligation. He was hunting something specific, methodically, patiently, exactly the way I once hunted actual military targets. That kind of patience terrified me more than any amount of brute force could have, mostly because patience like that rarely fails through simple bad luck alone. We reported everything back to Yara and Marin that evening, watching both their faces shift through the same uncomfortable realization we'd already processed ourselves. "He knows something specific is out here," Yara said quietly. After a long, heavy silence, nobody seemed eager to break first with their own private conclusions. "He suspects," I corrected gently. "Knowing and suspecting are different problems, and right now, our entire survival depends on keeping that exact difference intact." Marin asked the question nobody else wanted to voice directly: how long we could realistically keep that difference intact before suspicion hardened into certainty. I didn't have a comfortable answer for her, which felt unfamiliar and uncomfortable in ways I hadn't experienced since the earliest, most desperate days of my old reign. What I did have was a plan starting to take uncomfortable shape, one that involved getting considerably stronger before Krell's patience finally ran its course. That night, lying awake beside Senna and Kor near the new den's entrance, I finally told them everything Yara had already quietly suspected for months. I told them about Edric Thal, about Asheville, about Bastion's blade finding my ribs in a throne room neither of them could possibly picture properly. I told them about the legend Yara had shared, about bloodlines waking near unfinished business, about exactly why Krell's hounds terrified me more than they should. Kor listened without interrupting once, which honestly worried me more than any outburst would have, his expression unreadable in the dim, flickering firelight. Senna's reaction was different, quieter, more thoughtful. The particular stillness of someone rearranging an entire understanding of a friend around new information. "So that's why you always think 3 moves ahead of everyone else," she said eventually, not quite a question, just another piece settling carefully into place. Kor finally spoke after a long silence, asking the one question I'd genuinely been dreading more than literally any other possible response available to him. "Does that make you our king, then?" he asked, and something in his tone suggested he already half expected and half dreaded whatever answer came next. "No," I told him firmly. "It makes me a friend who happens to remember being a king once, which honestly feels like a considerably smaller, less impressive thing." Kor seemed to actually relax at that answer, his shoulders dropping slightly, like he'd been bracing for something far heavier than what I'd actually offered him. "Good," he said simply. "Because I already decided a while ago you're Pack, and Pack doesn't suddenly become something else just because of one complicated story." That answer hit harder than I expected, considering how thoroughly that exact wolf had once treated me like the most disposable runt in our entire litter. Senna pressed closer against my side that night, saying nothing further, just offering the same quiet, steady warmth she'd offered since our very first season. Yara, listening from a respectful distance, finally allowed herself a small, satisfied nod, the expression of someone whose patience had just been properly rewarded. Knowing didn't change much practically the next morning, except now I had 2 more people willing to plan with full information instead of careful guesswork. We spent the following weeks training harder than ever, preparing specifically for the moment Krell's patience finally ran out and forced a direct confrontation. That moment arrived sooner than any of us expected, on a gray afternoon when Krell's hounds finally caught a genuine trace near our relocated territory's edge. Yara spotted the approaching party first. Fewer men than before, but considerably more dangerous, moving with the focused urgency of hunters who'd finally found something real. We scattered the younger pups deeper into the forest immediately, while Kor, Senna, Yara, and I held the narrow approach the hounds had clearly tracked toward us. Krell himself led the advance personally, eyes scanning the tree line with unsettling precision, like he already knew exactly what he was about to find waiting there. His hounds strained against their leads, noses pointed directly at our position, confirming whatever scent they'd been specifically trained to recognize and follow. "There," Krell said simply, pointing directly toward our exact hiding spot with the calm certainty of a man who'd never once doubted his own careful methods. What happened next still feels strange to fully describe, even now the exact moment my chest finally, properly, undeniably, caught fire from somewhere deep inside. Not literal fire, though it felt close enough. A surge of heat and pressure rolling outward from my ribs exactly where Bastion's blade had once found its mark. My eyes went gold again, except this time the gold didn't fade after 3 careful heartbeats. It simply stayed, steady, burning, undeniably, permanently present. Kor and Senna both froze beside me, staring with the same shocked expression I imagined my old royal guard once wore during my actual coronation ceremony. Krell's hounds stopped advancing entirely, whimpering low in their throats, ears flattened, every trained instinct apparently screaming some warning their handlers couldn't hear. Even Krell himself hesitated for one critical heartbeat, his confident stride faltering slightly as he studied whatever was happening across my suddenly glowing eyes. I felt something else too. Beneath the heat, something closer to memory than sensation, flashes of throne rooms, war councils, and a crown I hadn't worn in years. I didn't attack. Some old instinct, sharper than fear, told me clearly that revealing too much too soon would cost far more than it could possibly gain. Instead, I let out a sound I'd never made before, low, resonant, carrying something underneath it that made every single hound flatten immediately to the ground. Krell's men shifted nervously, weapons raised but suddenly uncertain, the particular hesitation of soldiers facing something their training hadn't actually prepared them for. "Stand down," Krell ordered sharply. Though his own voice carried a tightness I doubted his men had heard from their cold, methodical huntmaster before that moment. Nobody moved for several long, suspended seconds. The entire clearing balanced on some invisible edge between violence and whatever strange alternative I just offered. I held that golden stare directly on Krell himself, letting him see exactly enough to question his certainty without confirming anything he could carry back as proof. Whatever he saw in my eyes that afternoon, it was apparently enough. He called his hounds back, slowly, deliberately, never once turning his back toward us. "This isn't finished," he said, more to himself than to any of us, before finally retreating with his unsettled party back toward whatever camp they'd established nearby. The moment they disappeared from sight, my legs finally gave out beneath me, the golden heat draining away as suddenly as it had originally arrived. Kor caught me before I hit the ground completely, his earlier wariness replaced entirely by something closer to fierce, protective loyalty I hadn't expected from him. Senna pressed against my other side immediately, both of them practically carrying me the rest of the way back toward where Yara waited with the others. "What was that?" Kor asked once we'd reached safety, his voice carrying genuine awe rather than the fear I'd half expected after witnessing something that strange. "I'm honestly not entirely sure," I admitted, which felt uncomfortably true after years of always having a confident, prepared answer ready for absolutely everyone. Yara examined me carefully, checking my breathing, my eyes, the steady tremor still running through muscles that had apparently spent themselves completely in seconds. "Whatever that was," she said eventually, "it bought us time, which right now matters considerably more than fully understanding the mechanics behind how it worked." She was right, as usual. Understanding could wait. Survival, recovery, and preparing for whatever Krell decided to do next absolutely could not wait nearly as long. We relocated the pack again that same night, deeper still, putting as much distance as physically possible between us and wherever Krell's party had retreated to. I slept for nearly 2 full days afterward, my body apparently demanding payment for whatever it had briefly borrowed against during that tense golden standoff. When I finally woke, Senna was curled against my side and Kor sat watch at the den entrance, both clearly having refused to leave my recovery unguarded. Marin brought food without comment, though her eyes lingered on mine a long moment, searching for any lingering trace of that gold before finally looking away. "It's gone," I told her quietly, and something in her posture eased slightly, though not nearly as much as I expected, given how frightening that day must have looked. "Good," she said simply. "Whatever that was, it cost you something. Ha! I'd rather my son spend that cost wisely than waste it proving a point to a stranger." My son. She'd never called me that before, not directly, not in words instead of actions, and something about hearing it now landed far harder than expected. I didn't trust my voice enough to respond properly, so I simply leaned into her instead, the same way I had as the smallest, weakest pup in that first crowded litter. Word reached us through Drask's scouts a week later that Krell's party had withdrawn entirely from Greymoor's surrounding region, retreating back toward the capital. Retreating, Yara noted carefully, not abandoning the search entirely. Men like Krell don't simply give up because something frightened them once in a forest. "He'll come back with answers next time," I agreed, "or at least better questions, neither of which leaves us any real comfort regarding what comes after this. Whatever he reports to Bastion, our window for staying quietly hidden just shrank considerably smaller than it already was before that confrontation happened." That uncomfortable truth settled over the pack like an early frost. The unspoken understanding that whatever piece we'd carved out had an increasingly visible end date. I spent the following weeks trying deliberately to summon that golden heat again, with considerably less success than I'd honestly hoped for going into it. It came easily once, under genuine threat, real danger, real fear for people I'd actually grown to care about. Deliberate practice apparently wasn't the same trigger. Yara suspected as much, reminding me gently that legends rarely work conveniently on command, no matter how badly a desperate king might prefer otherwise. By the time autumn returned, nearly a full year after that very first hunting raid, Greymoor felt less like temporary shelter and more like genuine home. Drask's pack had become something close to allies, sharing scouting duties and occasionally even meals, an arrangement neither of us could have predicted that first tense parley. Kor had grown into someone I genuinely trusted at my back, the exact loyalty I'd once desperately wished for from a friend who'd betrayed me completely instead. Senna had become something harder to name carefully, somewhere between closest ally and something warmer I wasn't entirely ready to examine too directly yet. Yara remained exactly what she'd always been, patient, watchful, occasionally infuriating, and absolutely indispensable in ways I was only beginning to fully appreciate. Marin finally openly called me her son in front of the entire pack, a small gesture that somehow mattered more than any royal title I'd ever actually held. None of that changed the fundamental problem still waiting patiently at the edge of everything we'd built: bastion, Asheville, and a throne built on a lie. Krell's retreat bought us time, not safety. Somewhere in that stolen capital, a report was already moving steadily toward a man who feared exactly what I represented. I started thinking seriously, for the first time since waking in that den, about what actually came after simply surviving long enough to grow stronger. Surviving had been the entire plan for nearly 2 full years now. It had worked. But survival alone was never going to undo a single thing Bastion had actually done. My son was somewhere inside those walls, raised by a man who'd murdered his father and apparently decided that was an acceptable foundation for raising a child. My wife was somewhere inside those same walls too, if Yara's older information still held true, kept quiet, controlled, and almost certainly carefully watched. Yara's legend mentioned the bloodline waking fully near unfinished business, and nothing about my unfinished business was getting any less unfinished by waiting patiently. I gathered Kor, Senna, Yara, and Marin together one cold evening, the same small unofficial council that had quietly guided this pack through an entire brutal year. I told them what I was actually considering, moving closer to Asheville itself, not to attack, not yet, just to see it, to confirm what Yara's legend implied. Marin's first reaction was immediate, sharp refusal, the exact protective instinct I remembered seeing in Leora's eyes whenever I'd proposed something reckless as king. Kor's reaction surprised me more, quiet consideration rather than objection, the look of someone already calculating how he'd handle security along that exact route. Senna said nothing for a long moment, studying me carefully before finally asking the only question that genuinely mattered. When do we actually leave, then? We, I repeated, and she just raised an eyebrow at me, the universal expression for, did you seriously think I was letting you do this completely alone? Yara settled the argument before it could properly start, reminding everyone that a king who never approaches his own unfinished business stays unfinished forever. Marin finally relented, though reluctantly, extracting a promise that we'd move carefully, scout thoroughly, and retreat instantly if anything felt remotely wrong. That promise felt easier to make than I expected, mostly because some old stubborn part of me already suspected I wouldn't fully keep it once Asheville's walls came into view. We set a departure date for the following week, giving everyone time to prepare properly for a journey none of us could honestly predict the true ending of. The night before we left, I climbed the tallest ridge near our territory alone, staring south toward walls I'd once personally designed and proudly built myself. Somewhere behind those walls, Bastion sat comfortably on a throne stained with my own blood, utterly convinced his careful murder had permanently solved his problem. He had no idea the White Wolf was already closer than any hunting party had ever managed to get, and considerably more patient than any legend had warned him about. Would you have stormed those walls immediately or scouted carefully first, like Marin insisted? Let me know below, and I will see you in part 3. We left Greymore at dawn, 5 of us moving quietly south, leaving Drask's scouts watching our old territory in our absence. Marin insisted on coming despite every argument I raised, reminding me sharply that mothers don't simply wait at home while their sons walk toward danger. Kor scouted ahead most mornings, Senna covered our trail behind, and Yara navigated using forest knowledge older than most of Asheville's actual roads. I'd forgotten, somewhere during 2 years of survival, just how much land separated Greymore from the capital I'd once governed from a comfortable throne. The journey took us through territory I barely recognized, not because the land had changed, but because everything living on it clearly had. We passed 3 burned villages in the first 4 days alone, abandoned shells with scorch marks that told a story far older than any recent purge. Yara confirmed what I already suspected. These weren't accidents or bandit raids. These were deliberate, systematic, exactly the way Bastion's purges always were. Whole forests near those villages stood eerily silent too. None of the usual birdsong, none of the small creature noise that fills healthy woodland naturally. Whatever cleansing campaign Bastion had launched against cursed bloodlines clearly hadn't limited itself carefully to actual wolves alone. I felt that cold, familiar fury returning every single time we passed another scorched clearing, another abandoned den, another silence where life should have been. Senna noticed me brooding one evening and nudged my shoulder gently, the same quiet gesture she'd been offering since our very first difficult season together. You can't carry every single one of these on your own shoulders, she told me, and you definitely can't fix 2 years of damage before we even reach the walls. She was right, infuriatingly right, the same way Yara usually was, though admitting that out loud felt considerably harder than simply staying angry instead. Kor handled the journey differently, channeling his frustration into hunting, bringing back more food than 5 wolves could reasonably finish each evening. Feeding the people who can't feed themselves anymore felt like the only useful thing I know how to actually do about any of this, he admitted one quiet night. We left meat near 2 of the abandoned villages, not because anyone remained to eat it, but because leaving something felt better than leaving absolutely nothing. Marin walked beside me most evenings without speaking much, the particular quiet of someone processing grief that belonged to strangers rather than family. "This isn't the world I raised pups expecting them to grow up inside," she said once, staring at yet another scorched clearing under a gray, indifferent sky. "It's the world Bastion built on top of the one I actually left him," I told her, which honestly didn't make either of us feel meaningfully better afterward. By the 6th day, the burned villages thinned out, replaced gradually by farmland that looked merely neglected rather than deliberately destroyed entirely. We were getting closer to a territory Bastion actually bothered protecting, which apparently meant the destruction became more selective and considerably more political. Yara explained it plainly one evening. Purges happen loudest in places nobody important watches closely, and quietest in places that actually matter to a throne. That assessment matched everything I remembered about governing, unfortunately, the uncomfortable truth that visibility shapes cruelty far more than morality ever does. On the 8th day, we crossed a ridge Yara remembered from decades earlier, and there it finally was, distant smoke rising from chimneys I'd once personally counted. Ashvale. Not the legend, not the memory, not the throne room where a dagger had once found my ribs. The actual stone and timber city, sitting exactly where I'd left it. Seeing it again hit differently than I expected, somewhere between grief and something uncomfortably close to homesickness for a life that wasn't technically mine anymore. Kor noticed my reaction immediately, settling beside me without comment, the particular silent support he'd gotten remarkably skilled at offering over 2 years. "We're close now," Yara said quietly, "which means everything from here forward needs considerably more caution than anything we've managed up until this exact point. We made camp in a wooded ridge, overlooking Ashvale's outer farmland, far enough away to stay hidden, close enough to finally see real details, clearly. The city walls looked exactly as I remembered them, gray stone reinforced with timber, except for one addition that made my stomach turn uncomfortably cold. Banners hung from every visible tower, not the old golden wolf crest I'd designed myself, but a new sigil entirely, a black sword crossed over closed iron gates. Bastion had replaced my crest completely, erasing the wolf symbol from public view the same way he'd apparently tried erasing everything else about my actual reign. "Smart move, honestly," I admitted bitterly. "Hard to convince people wolves are cursed monsters while flying their image proudly over your own capital city." Yara studied the walls through narrowed eyes, picking apart details only someone with decades of careful observation would naturally notice immediately. "New guard towers," she noted, "more than your reign ever required. Whoever rules that city now is considerably more worried about threats than you apparently were." "Maybe he should be," I said quietly, watching smoke curl up from what used to be the Royal Forge, now apparently repurposed into something else entirely. We spent 2 full days simply watching before risking anything closer, learning patrol patterns, gate schedules, and the general rhythm of a city under careful control. The main gate stayed busy throughout daylight hours, merchants, farmers, and travelers moving steadily in and out under the watchful eyes of armed alert guards. Senna pointed out something I'd missed entirely. Every single guard checked travelers' eyes specifically, lingering a beat too long on anyone with unusual coloring. "They're checking for bloodline markers," I realized slowly. The exact same precaution Krell's hounds had been trained to sniff out months earlier in our own forest. Whatever Krell reported back from Greymore had apparently convinced Bastion to extend that suspicion well past forests, straight into his own capital's front gate. That should have worried me more than it actually did. Instead, it confirmed something useful. Bastion was scared enough to act, which meant he believed the threat was real. "Fear makes powerful men sloppy eventually," I told the others one evening, watching torchlight flicker along the unfamiliar new battlements above us. "It also makes them dangerous in the meantime," Yara reminded me sharply. The particular correction that comes from someone who'd clearly survived dangerous men before. We needed information that watching from a ridge simply couldn't provide. Market gossip, court rumors, the kind of details only proximity could actually deliver. "Someone needs to get closer," Kor said eventually, voicing the obvious conclusion none of us had wanted to say first during that tense, quiet evening discussion. "I'll go," I said immediately, which earned exactly the chorus of objections I'd fully expected from every single member of our small, stubborn traveling council. "Absolutely not alone," Marin said flatly, the tone she'd apparently inherited specifically from moments when her son proposed something recklessly dangerous. We compromised eventually. Senna and I would scout together at night, while Kor, Yara, and Marin held our camp and watched the surrounding approach roads carefully. 2 wolves moving quietly at night drew considerably less attention than 5, and Senna's speed meant we could retreat fast if anything went seriously wrong. We waited until the new moon, when darkness offered the best possible cover for slipping closer to walls, patrolled by men trained specifically to notice strangers. The night we finally moved, I felt something stir faintly in my chest again, not the full golden heat, just a low simmering warmth, like embers waiting for proper fuel. "Proximity," Yara had warned. The closer I got to my own unfinished business, the harder that bloodline apparently wanted to wake up completely and permanently. I pushed that warmth carefully aside. focusing instead on the immediate, practical problem of crossing open farmland without alerting a single patrolling guard. Senna and I crossed the farmland low and quiet, using irrigation ditches and hedgerows the same way I'd once used trenches during actual border campaigns. We found a gap in the outer wall near an old drainage culvert, one I recognized immediately because I'd personally approved its construction over a decade earlier. Funny how building something carefully for one purpose occasionally hands your enemies, or in this case yourself, exactly the access nobody intended to provide. The culvert led into a quiet alley near the lower market district, dark, narrow, and mercifully empty of the patrols, stationed more heavily near the main gates. Ashvale at night looked smaller than I remembered, though I suspected that had more to do with my current height than any actual change to the city itself. We stayed low, moving between shadows, following the particular hum of late conversation drifting from a tavern that had somehow survived 2 full regime changes. Listening at the edge of that tavern's open window, I heard something I hadn't expected. Actual disagreement about Bastion's rule spoken without obvious fear. Taxes again, an old voice grumbled. 3rd increase this year, all to pay for hounds and patrols, hunting wolves, nobody's actually seen causing real trouble. Another voice answered, quieter, careful. You know why he's nervous? Sigil stones turning up in old forests tend to make a man worry about his own stolen throne. My pulse quickened, hearing that. Confirmation that word of the Greymore discovery had genuinely traveled all the way back here, exactly as Krell had implied. A 3rd voice joined in, even quieter. The kind of careful whisper that comes from someone checking first whether anyone unfamiliar might be listening too closely. The old king's wife still walks the eastern garden every morning, he said. Some say she's waiting for something. Others say she simply hasn't given up hoping. Leora. Still alive, still visible enough that ordinary tavern gossip mentioned her routine casually, which meant Bastion hadn't fully silenced or hidden her completely. And the boy, the first voice added. Growing up fast, they say. Doesn't favor his Uncle Bastion much in temperament, whatever that's actually worth politically. My son. Hearing him mentioned by strangers in a crowded tavern hit harder than any battle wound ever had, a strange ache landing somewhere beneath actual ribs. Senna pressed against my side gently, sensing exactly what that overheard conversation had cost me, without needing a single word of explanation from either of us. We moved on before curiosity risked exposure, slipping deeper into the market district where stalls sat shuttered and quiet under careful nighttime patrol coverage. I recognized half the buildings instantly. The granary I'd commissioned, the chapel I'd funded after the border wars, the well I'd personally argued for during a drought. Most stood unchanged structurally, though several bore fresh stonework where my old crest had clearly been chiseled away and replaced with Bastion's black sword sigil. One particular building stopped me cold, the small bakery near the eastern gate that Leora used to visit personally, despite every advisor insisting it was beneath her. A faint light still burned inside, despite the late hour, and through a gap in the shutters, I caught sight of an old man kneading dough with practiced, tired hands. That's Thomas, Senna whispered. Recognizing him somehow from earlier scouting reports Yara had gathered weeks before our actual journey south had even started. Yara mentioned him specifically, she continued. Apparently, he still leaves bread out some mornings for stray animals, the kind of small kindness nobody officially tracks. We watched him a moment longer before moving on, filing away one more small, fragile thread of decency, stubbornly surviving inside a city built on careful fear. Near the market's edge, a notice board displayed fresh parchment, official decrees posted regularly for anyone literate enough to read Bastion's careful, controlled language. One decree caught my attention immediately, a reward offered for credible sightings of unusual white wolves anywhere within 3 days' travel of the capital. The reward amount alone told me everything I needed to know about how seriously Bastion now took whatever Krell had reported back from that forest standoff. Another decree mentioned upcoming celebrations, the anniversary of Bastion's coronation, scheduled for barely 2 weeks from whatever date currently sat fresh on that board. The exact event the original Purge decree had referenced, the deadline everything seemed to be quietly building toward since that very first hunting party years ago. Whatever happened at that anniversary celebration, Bastion clearly intended to present something specific to justify 2 full years of expensive, expanding purges. We retreated before dawn, slipping back through the same drainage culvert, carrying considerably more information than we'd honestly expected to gather in one single night. The walk back to camp felt longer than the walk in had, weighted down by everything we'd overheard and everything we still desperately needed to learn. Marin, Kor, and Yara listened carefully as we relayed everything, the tavern gossip, Leora's garden walks, Aldous growing up, and the looming coronation anniversary. 2 weeks, Yara repeated slowly, turning the timeline over in her mind the same careful way she once turned over old forest legends before sharing them. That's when the original decree said the Purge needed results, I reminded everyone. Whatever Bastion plans to announce, it's tied directly to that exact date. Kor's first instinct was caution, suggesting we retreat back toward Greymore entirely and wait for clearer information before risking anything closer to that event. Marin agreed immediately, her protective instincts fully engaged after hearing how close Senna and I had moved through patrolled streets the previous night. I understood their caution completely, even shared it honestly, but something stubborn underneath that caution refused to simply walk away without seeing more. "My son will be standing somewhere in that celebration," I said quietly, probably close enough to actually see if I positioned myself correctly beforehand. The silence that followed that sentence stretched longer than any argument could have, everyone clearly weighing risk against the particular weight of that specific reason. Yara broke the silence eventually, asking the practical question nobody else wanted to voice first. What exactly did I hope seeing him would actually accomplish? I didn't have a clean answer ready, which felt unusual after years of always having confident answers prepared for every single difficult question imaginable. Maybe nothing, I admitted honestly. Maybe just confirming he's alive, that he's safe, that whatever Bastion's done to this kingdom hasn't completely broken him yet. Senna spoke up then, quieter than usual, suggesting something none of us had fully considered, that this could also be the proximity Yara's legend specifically described. "Standing close to your unfinished business," she said carefully, "watching your son, watching the throne, watching the man who stole everything from you directly." That observation landed heavily across our small circle, the uncomfortable realization that this celebration might be exactly the trigger Yara's legend had warned about. "If the bloodline fully wakes there," Yara said slowly, "we need a plan considerably more careful than simply wandering close and hoping for the best outcome." We spent the following days mapping the celebration's likely route, using market gossip, old palace knowledge I still remembered, and careful additional scouting trips. The procession traditionally moved from the palace gates through the main market square before ending at the chapel I'd personally funded years earlier. Crowds gathered thickest near the chapel steps, where the royal family traditionally appeared publicly for blessings, before retreating back behind palace walls. If Aldous appeared anywhere visibly, it would almost certainly be there, surrounded by guards, but also surrounded by exactly the kind of crowd that could hide a wolf. "Hide a wolf among humans," Kor repeated skeptically, clearly unconvinced that particular plan sounded nearly as reasonable, spoken aloud, as it had inside my own head. "Not openly, obviously," I clarified. "Rooftops, alleys, the same shadows Senna and I already used successfully slipping through that exact district 2 nights earlier." Yara eventually agreed, reluctantly, on the condition that only myself and Senna would actually enter the city again, with Kor and Marin holding the perimeter outside. "I don't love this plan," Marin said flatly, watching me with the exact expression I remembered from childhood whenever I'd proposed something quietly terrifying to her. "I don't love it either," I admitted. But waiting safely in Greymoor forever was never actually going to undo anything Bastion's done to this entire kingdom. We spent the remaining days before the celebration training carefully, refining the stillness techniques, the silent movement, everything that had kept us alive this long. Yara also spent considerable time trying to help me deliberately summon that golden heat again, with results that remained frustratingly inconsistent at best. "It wants a reason," she said eventually. After another failed attempt left me exhausted and embarrassed in equal measure. Not effort, a genuine, undeniable reason. The celebration would certainly provide reasons, more reasons than I honestly felt prepared for, which worried me considerably more than any simple lack of control. The morning of the coronation anniversary arrived gray and overcast, fitting weather honestly for whatever Bastion intended to celebrate inside those stolen walls. Senna and I crossed the farmland before dawn again, slipping through the same drainage culvert that had served us reliably during our earlier nighttime scouting run. The city felt different in daylight, busier, louder, packed with visitors who'd traveled considerable distances, specifically for whatever spectacle Bastion had planned. We found a rooftop overlooking the chapel steps, accessible through a narrow gap between buildings that any guard patrol would have needed considerable effort to notice. Crowds gathered steadily through the morning, merchants closing stalls early, families claiming good vantage points, children perched on shoulders for a better view. By midday, the procession finally began, trumpets announcing movement from the palace gates exactly along the route we'd carefully mapped during previous scouting trips. Guards led first, considerably more than tradition required, their black sword banners snapping sharply in a wind that smelled faintly like rain still hours away. Then came court officials, nobles and advisors I half recognized despite 2 years of distance, faces aged slightly, postures carrying considerably more caution than before. My heart actually stopped briefly when Leora's carriage finally appeared, moving slowly through streets lined with citizens bowing with varying degrees of genuine respect. She looked older, understandably, but carried herself with exactly the same quiet dignity I remembered from council meetings she'd attended specifically to keep me honest. Her eyes scanned the crowd constantly, the particular alertness of someone who'd learned painfully to never fully trust whatever calm surrounded her in public anymore. Senna's paw pressed gently against mine, grounding me, the same quiet support she'd offered through 2 years of grief I'd never properly finished processing alone. Then I saw him, Aldous, walking beside the carriage rather than riding inside it, small but steady, dressed in formal colors that looked considerably too heavy for a child his age. He'd grown so much. Obviously he would have. 2 years passes the same way for children as everyone else, but seeing it directly still struck harder than expected. He had Leora's careful watchfulness already, scanning the crowd the exact same nervous way his mother did, like he'd learned that lesson far too young for comfort. He didn't look unhappy exactly, just guarded. The particular careful neutrality children develop quickly when raised, somewhere genuine safety isn't actually available. I wanted desperately to call out something, anything, some impossible signal that might somehow reach him despite the obvious, overwhelming impossibility of the entire idea. Senna must have sensed exactly what I was considering, because her teeth closed gently but firmly around my scruff, the universal wolf signal for absolutely not right now. She was right, infuriatingly right, the same way she usually was about exactly the moments where my judgment apparently abandoned me most completely and dangerously. The heat in my chest stirred again, stronger this time, building steadily the longer I watched my son walk through a city built on the lie of his father's death. My eyes felt warm, then hot, then unmistakably gold, the particular sensation I now recognized immediately from that tense standoff with Krell months earlier. Senna noticed instantly, her grip tightening on my scruff, pulling me back deeper into rooftop shadow before anyone below could possibly glance upward and notice. "Not here," she whispered urgently. "Whatever this is, it cannot happen here, surrounded by guards specifically trained to notice exactly this kind of unusual occurrence." I fought that golden heat back with everything I had left, focusing instead on breathing, on stillness, on every painful lesson Yara had drilled into me about patience. It receded slowly, reluctantly, like a tide, pulling back against its own stubborn preference, leaving me shaking slightly against the cold rooftop tile beneath us. Then the trumpet sounded again, louder, announcing the arrival everyone had clearly been waiting for, the man whose entire stolen reign this celebration actually honored. Bastian Vire stepped from the palace gates, wearing a crown I'd once worn myself, smiling at a crowd he'd convinced through fear to call him their rightful ruler. Seeing him directly, for the first time since his dagger had found my ribs, hit me with a force considerably stronger than even seeing Leora or Aldous had managed. The heat returned instantly, violently, no longer something I could simply breathe back down through patience or careful practice stillness alone. My vision sharpened impossibly, every detail of Bastian's face suddenly visible from a rooftop that should have been far too distant for that level of clarity. Senna grabbed my scruff again, harder this time, dragging me bodily backward across rooftop tiles that suddenly felt entirely too loud beneath scrambling paws. "We're leaving now," she said firmly, no longer bothering with whispers, her urgency cutting cleanly through whatever golden haze had started clouding my thinking. I stumbled after her, fighting the heat with every painful step, watching my own paws flicker briefly into something that looked unsettlingly close to human fingers. That sight alone shocked me back into something resembling control, the genuine horror of nearly transforming completely on an occupied rooftop, overlooking my own enemy. We moved fast across connected roofs, putting distance between ourselves and the chapel steps before the heat could possibly build toward whatever came after fingers. A guard below noticed movement above, shouting an alert that sent several armed men scrambling toward the nearest rooftop access ladder with alarming speed. Senna led us through a gap I hadn't even noticed during our earlier scouting, dropping down into a narrow alley that connected eventually back toward the drainage culvert. Behind us, shouting grew louder, more organized, the particular controlled urgency of trained guards responding to something genuinely unusual rather than ordinary disorder. "We're not going to make the culvert in time," Senna said, glancing backward at torchlight already gathering near the alley's far entrance behind us. I forced the heat down one final time, finding something I hadn't quite managed before. Control instead of suppression. A door closed deliberately rather than simply held shut. The relief of that small victory barely registered before practical danger demanded full attention again, guards closing distance faster than our current pace allowed. Senna spotted an old service entrance built into the chapel's foundation, the same kind of overlooked architectural detail builders rarely bother removing during renovations. I recognized it instantly, a maintenance tunnel I'd personally approved decades earlier for repairing the chapel's foundation without disrupting public worship above. We squeezed through a gap clearly meant for considerably smaller workers, emerging eventually inside a tunnel system running beneath several connected market buildings. Old habits apparently still paid dividends, even reincarnated as a wolf running from guards loyal to the very throne those exact tunnels had originally been built to serve. We navigated the tunnels using nothing but memory and instinct, surfacing eventually near the drainage culvert considerably further from the chapel than guards expected. The farmland beyond the wall stretched empty and quiet, no patrols visible yet, just open ground between us and whatever safety waited back at our hidden camp. We ran without stopping until Ashvale's walls had shrunk considerably smaller behind us, finally slowing once the immediate danger of pursuit felt genuinely behind us. Kor met us halfway, having clearly sensed something had gone wrong despite the considerable distance separating our camp from the city's actual walls themselves. "What happened?" he demanded, scanning both of us for injury before settling into the particular tense alertness that meant he expected a complicated, difficult answer. "I saw him," I said simply, still catching my breath. "Bastion." And whatever Yara warned about proximity and unfinished business, it's considerably more real than I expected. Marin examined my eyes carefully once we reached camp, searching for that golden flicker, finding instead something she described as still simmering rather than fully gone. Yara listened to the full account quietly, processing every detail with the particular care she usually reserved for genuinely serious problems requiring careful solutions. "It's building," she concluded eventually. "Each exposure pushes it further before receding. Eventually, proximity alone might not be enough to push it back down again." That sounded less like a warning and more like a countdown, the particular kind of problem that doesn't politely wait for convenient solutions to arrive first. "We need to leave the area entirely," Marin said firmly, "before whatever's building inside you finally finishes building somewhere considerably less controlled than tonight." I understood her logic completely, even agreed with most of it, but something stubborn underneath that agreement refused to simply abandon everything we'd just learned. Bastion's celebration confirmed everything. The purge, the fear, the desperation behind it. Running back to Greymore now meant running from an opportunity, not just danger. "What opportunity?" Kor asked carefully, watching me with the particular wariness he'd developed specifically for moments when my ambition outpaced everyone else's caution. "The opportunity to actually finish what started 2 years ago in a throne room," I said quietly, instead of simply surviving comfortably in a forest forever. That declaration landed heavily across our small camp, the particular silence that follows someone finally saying out loud what everyone else had quietly suspected. Marin's expression now shifted slowly from fear towards something more complicated, recognition perhaps, the look of a mother realizing her son had already decided something important. "You're not talking about confirming your son is alive anymore," she said carefully. "You're talking about actually taking back what Bastion stole from you directly?" "I am," I admitted, surprising myself with how steady that admission felt once it finally left my mouth, instead of just circling endlessly inside my own head. Yara nodded slowly, unsurprised, the particular expression of someone who'd been quietly expecting exactly this conversation since the moment we'd first left Greymore together. "The legend always pointed here eventually," she said. "Proximity wakes the bloodline. Unfinished business demands resolution. You were never actually going to simply walk away." Senna stayed quiet longer than usual, processing something carefully before finally speaking with the particular directness she'd developed since our very first difficult season. "If you're doing this," she said, "you're not doing it without me." The same flat statement she'd made before our very first scouting trip into the city itself. Kor echoed the sentiment immediately, his loyalty arriving without hesitation, despite every obvious risk involved in committing fully to something this dangerous. Marin took longer, understandably, weighing motherly instinct against the uncomfortable recognition that protecting me forever meant denying me exactly what I actually needed instead. "If you're doing this," she said finally, "you're doing it properly. With a plan, with patience, and considerably less reckless rooftop golden eye glowing than tonight." That earned a tired laugh from everyone present, the particular relief that comes from finding something to laugh about immediately after a genuinely terrifying night. We spent the following days planning carefully, drawing on everything we'd gathered, market gossip, patrol patterns, tunnel access, and Leora's predictable garden routine. Yara suggested something I hadn't fully considered, that Leora herself might already suspect more than Bastion realized given how openly she still walked that garden daily. Widows who genuinely accept their husband's death rarely maintain routines that specific for 2 full years, she said. Some part of her might still be watching, waiting. That possibility settled something uncertain in my chest, the faint, fragile hope that I might not need to approach this entirely alone after I finally revealed myself. We couldn't move immediately, not with guards on heightened alert after the rooftop incident, not with Krell almost certainly receiving fresh reports about unusual sightings. Patience again. The exact lesson Yara had drilled into me since that very first golden flicker years earlier in a den that had felt impossibly far from here. We retreated to a more distant camp, far enough from Ashvale's patrols to recover safely, close enough to monitor whatever Bastion's reaction to the incident actually became. Word filtered back through careful scouting that the guards reported an unusual creature glimpsed briefly on the chapel rooftop, dismissed publicly as nothing more than a large dog. Privately, though, Yara learned that Krell himself had been summoned back to the palace immediately, his earlier failure suddenly considerably more urgent and personal. "He'll be hunting again soon," she warned, "and this time he'll know exactly what he's looking for. Considerably more dangerous than the careful suspicion he carried before." I felt something settle inside me hearing that, less fear than I expected, more something closer to grim acceptance that confrontation had simply become inevitable now. The bloodline wanted resolution. Bastion wanted certainty. Krell wanted proof. Everyone circling the exact same unfinished business from completely different, increasingly dangerous directions. That night, sitting apart from the others near our new camp's edge, Senna found me staring south again toward walls now permanently familiar in an entirely new way. Thinking about him, she asked quietly, settling beside me without waiting for an invitation, the same easy closeness that had defined our friendship since that very first litter. About all of it, I admitted. Bastion, Leora, Aldous, whatever this bloodline is actually building toward every single time I get close enough to feel it stirring. Whatever happens next, she said firmly, you're not facing any of it alone. Not Bastion, not Krell, not whatever finally finishes waking up inside your own chest. I believed her completely, which honestly surprised me more than almost anything else that had happened since waking up blind and helpless in a crowded den. 2 years ago, I'd been a dying king with nobody left who genuinely wanted to stand beside me. Tonight, I had an entire pack willing to walk straight toward a throne. We spent the remaining nights before any final decision simply healing, training, and preparing for whatever shape this confrontation eventually decided to take. Yara continued teaching me whatever fragments of the old legend she remembered, hoping something useful might surface before the bloodline finally decided to fully wake. The bloodline doesn't care about convenient timing, she warned repeatedly. It answers to proximity and purpose, not to careful planning or patient royal scheduling. That warning proved correct sooner than any of us expected, when scouts reported Krell's return to the region barely a week after our rooftop encounter occurred. This time he traveled with considerably more soldiers, fresh hounds, and an unmistakable sense of urgency that suggested Bastion's patience had finally completely run out. He's not searching anymore, Yara reported grimly. He's hunting specifically, methodically, working outward from the chapel, exactly where we'd been seen that night. Kor suggested retreating further immediately, putting considerably more distance between ourselves and a huntmaster, clearly determined to finish whatever he'd started months earlier. Running forever was never actually the plan, I reminded him gently, even as something cold settled into my chest at the thought of Krell's hounds circling closer. Marin's jaw tightened at that reminder, though she didn't argue further, the particular silence of someone who'd already accepted an ending she desperately wished wasn't coming. Senna simply moved closer, the way she always did when words felt insufficient for whatever tension had settled heavily over our entire small, exhausted camp. Whatever Krell intended to do once he found us, and we all suspected he eventually would, it wouldn't be another careful standoff ending in quiet, mutual retreat. The last time, Golden Eyes alone had been enough to make him hesitate. This time, hesitation felt considerably less likely given everything that had happened since. I spent that final quiet evening reviewing everything Yara had taught me, every fragment of legend, every uncertain detail about exactly what fully waking actually meant. The bloodline answers to purpose, she'd said. Not effort, not anger, not even fear. Something closer to genuine, undeniable conviction about what actually needed finishing. I thought about Leora's garden routine, about Aldis's careful watchfulness, about Bastion's crown sitting comfortably on a head that had once smiled while killing me. Conviction, apparently, wasn't actually difficult to locate once I stopped pretending 2 years of careful survival had somehow been the entire point all along. Somewhere beyond our camp's edge, Krell's hounds were already moving closer, following a trail that led inevitably back toward exactly where we'd chosen to stand. Whatever happened next, I finally understood something Yara's legend had been quietly insisting on since that very first golden flicker years earlier in a crowded den. The White Wolf hadn't survived 2 years, simply to keep surviving safely forever. He'd survived to finally finish something a dagger had interrupted in a throne room. Krell's torches appeared on the distant ridge just before dawn, considerably sooner than even Yara's careful estimates had predicted for his approach toward our camp. This time, I told the others quietly, watching those torches multiply steadily along the horizon, I don't think Golden Eyes alone are going to be enough. Do you think Krell finally corners them this time? Or does the bloodline finish waking before he even gets the chance? Tell me below, part 4 is coming next. Krell's torches multiplied steadily along the ridge, more men than his earlier visit, hounds straining eagerly against leads held by considerably tenser handlers. We didn't run this time. 2 years of running had taught me plenty, but none of those lessons applied any more to whatever decision actually needed making at dawn. Kor took position at my right, Senna at my left, Yara and Marin guarding the younger pups gathered nervously behind us in the thinning morning mist. Krell himself walked point, his expression carrying none of the earlier hesitation, just grim, methodical certainty that today's hunt would finally end successfully. "White Wolf," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the open ground separating us. "The capital extends an invitation. Surrender now, or don't survive the morning." "Generous of you," I said, surprising even myself with how steady my voice sounded, given everything currently simmering dangerously close beneath my own skin. Krell's eyes narrowed slightly, clearly unsettled that a wolf had just answered him in something resembling actual speech rather than a simple defiant growl. "You understand me?" he said slowly, more statement than question. The particular tone of a man finally confirming something he'd suspected for considerably longer than he'd admitted. "I understand considerably more than you'd probably find comfortable, Huntmaster Krell," I told him, watching his hounds flatten their ears at the sound of his own title. He recovered quickly, professional caution overriding momentary surprise. "Whatever you are, the capital's decree still applies. Cursed bloodlines don't get exceptions." "Funny you'd call it cursed," I said, feeling that golden heat finally stirring properly, no longer simmering quietly, but rising with genuine, deliberate purpose now. "Considering the bloodline you're hunting built the very walls you're currently defending, brick by brick, treaty by careful treaty, decade after exhausting decade." Krell's confidence flickered just slightly, the particular crack that appears when certainty meets something its owner genuinely hadn't prepared themselves to consider. "Lies," he said, though his voice carried less conviction than the word itself demanded. "The old king died years ago. Whatever you are, you're not him." My eyes went gold then, fully, completely, the heat spreading outward from my chest in a wave that made the morning mist itself seem to shiver and part. This time, it didn't recede after a few careful heartbeats. It built steadily, deliberately, exactly the way Yara had warned conviction alone could finally finish waking something. My body shifted then, not fully, not completely human, but something between, taller, broader, my front paws lengthening into something closer to clawed hands. The legend, apparently, hadn't exaggerated. Whatever this bloodline actually was, it clearly intended something considerably more dramatic than simply glowing eyes alone. Krell's hounds broke first, whimpering, then bolting entirely, dragging confused handlers, stumbling backward across ground that suddenly felt considerably less safe than before. His soldiers hesitated visibly, weapons raised but uncertain. Watching their huntmaster for guidance, he honestly didn't seem entirely prepared to actually provide them. "Stand your ground," Krell ordered, though his own feet had already shifted backward half a step before the words even finished leaving his mouth properly. I didn't attack. Even now, with power I'd never fully felt before coursing through whatever this body had become, that same old instinct held me carefully back. "Look at me, Krell," I said, my voice carrying something neither fully wolf nor fully human anymore, something considerably older than either form separately allowed. "Look closely, and tell your men honestly what you actually see standing in front of you, instead of whatever convenient story the capital's been selling for 2 years. Krell stared, really stared, his professional composure cracking slowly as recognition fought visibly against everything he'd been trained, ordered, and paid to believe instead. "The eyes," he whispered, more to himself than to anyone listening. The old king had eyes exactly that color. I remember them from court portraits as a boy. "You remember correctly," I told him gently, the heat slowly settling into something steadier, more controlled, less overwhelming than it had felt mere moments earlier. "My name is Edric Thal. I built every wall, every road, every granary your capital still depends on, before Bastion Vyre decided murder suited him better than gratitude." Several soldiers behind Krell exchanged uneasy glances, the particular silence of men suddenly questioning orders they'd previously accepted without much careful consideration. Krell lowered his weapon slowly, not in surrender exactly, but in the particular hesitation of a man recalculating everything he thought he'd actually understood about his entire mission. "Whatever you actually are," Krell said carefully, "my orders still came directly from the throne. I can't simply walk away from that, regardless of what I just witnessed." "I'm not asking you to walk away," I told him. "I'm asking you to deliver a message considerably more accurate than whatever report you originally intended to write. Tell Bastion exactly what you saw here this morning," I continued. "Tell him the White Wolf remembers everything, including precisely how that dagger found its mark." Krell studied me a long moment, weighing something I suspected went considerably deeper than simple professional duty, or whatever fear still lingered beneath his careful composure. "Why let me leave it all?" he asked finally. "You clearly could have ended this confrontation entirely differently, given whatever power just rolled through you moments ago. Because I built this kingdom on the idea that fear shouldn't be the only language available between a throne and the people forced to live beneath it." That answer seemed to land harder than any threat could have, Krell's expression shifting slowly toward something I almost recognized as grudging, complicated respect. He called his hounds back eventually, gathering his shaken soldiers, retreating across the ridge without the confident stride he'd arrived with earlier that same morning. Kor exhaled slowly once they'd disappeared from sight, the particular tension leaving his shoulders that comes after surviving something nobody had fully expected to survive. "That was either the smartest or most reckless thing you've ever done," he said. "And honestly, I'm still not entirely sure which one it actually was. Maybe both," I admitted, feeling my body settling slowly back toward its more familiar shape, the strange hybrid form fading like mist burning off under morning sun. Senna pressed close against my side immediately, checking me carefully for injury, despite the obvious fact that the confrontation had ended without a single drop of blood spilled. "You're shaking," she said quietly, and I realized she was right, my entire body trembling with the aftermath of whatever that transformation had genuinely cost me. Yara approached slowly, studying me with an expression somewhere between awe and the particular satisfaction of watching a long-suspected prediction finally prove itself true. "The legend was right," she said simply. "Conviction, not effort. You finally believed something worth fully waking up for." And the bloodline apparently agreed completely. Maren said nothing for a long moment, just pulled me close the way she had during my very first terrified night surviving that original hunting party's raid. "My son," she finally said, voice rough with emotion she rarely let surface this openly. "Whatever you actually are now, king or wolf or something else entirely. I'm still proud of exactly who you've become," she finished, and something in my chest ached considerably more gently than the golden heat ever had managed alone. Krell's retreat bought us time, though nobody pretended that time would last especially long once Bastion actually heard whatever report eventually reached his stolen throne. "He'll come himself now," I said quietly, watching the ridge where Krell's torches had finally disappeared completely into the brightening, indifferent morning sky above us. Bastion's never been the type to trust someone else handling a problem this personal, not after spending years carefully eliminating every threat to his stolen authority. Yara agreed immediately. "Whatever happens next, it happens fast." Men like Bastion don't wait patiently once they realize their careful lies have started genuinely unraveling. We gathered everyone that same morning. Kor, Senna, Yara, Maren, and even messengers sent racing toward Drask's pack, requesting whatever support they could spare quickly. Drask's response arrived faster than expected, a full dozen wolves volunteering immediately, repaying a debt none of us had actually expected collected this particular way. "We owe the White Wolf considerably more than territory," Drask's message read, "and I intend to make certain that debt gets properly honored before this ends." We marched south within the day, considerably larger than the small traveling party that had originally slipped quietly past Ashvale's walls just weeks earlier. Word apparently traveled faster than wolves could run because farmers along our route watched us pass with expressions caught somewhere between fear and cautious curiosity. One old farmer, recognizing something in my eyes I hadn't expected anyone outside our pack to notice, simply bowed his head slightly as we passed his field. He said nothing, asked nothing, just returned to his work afterward, though I noticed him watching our retreating column considerably longer than simple curiosity required. Yara mentioned something that night that stuck with me considerably longer than I expected, that ordinary people often recognize truth faster than nobles ever bother trying to. "They've lived under Bastion's fear for 2 years," she said. "Anyone offering even the possibility of something different tends to notice considerably more carefully than usual. We avoided the main roads where possible, sticking to forest cover and farmland edges, though our growing numbers made staying completely hidden increasingly difficult regardless. Kor organized our approach with surprising tactical instinct, splitting our group into smaller traveling units that would reconverge only once we'd reached the capital's outskirts. Senna handled scouting personally, returning each evening with updated reports about patrol movements, troop concentrations, and whatever defensive preparations Ashvale had started organizing. "They're pulling soldiers back from outer patrol routes," she reported on the third evening, consolidating everything closer to the palace itself rather than the city walls. That suggested Bastion already understood exactly what kind of threat approached, regardless of whatever specific details Krell's report had actually managed to convey accurately. Maren stayed close throughout the march, though she'd stopped arguing against the plan entirely somewhere around the moment Drask's wolves had joined our growing column. "Some battles," she told me one evening, "aren't actually worth winning through caution alone. Sometimes you simply commit fully and trust everything you've built getting you through." That sounded suspiciously like advice I'd once given my own war councils decades earlier, advice apparently surviving reincarnation considerably better than most things actually had. We reached Asheville's outer farmland on the 5th day, considerably faster than our original journey south had taken with a much smaller, more cautious traveling party. The city looked different, approaching with purpose rather than careful secrecy, the same gray walls somehow appearing smaller against a column of wolves prepared to test them. Yara called a final council that evening, gathering Kor, Senna, Maren, Drask, and myself around a small fire built specifically for planning rather than warmth. "We can't simply storm those walls," Drask said practically. "Even with our combined numbers, soldiers behind stone defenses hold considerable advantage over wolves in open ground." "I'm not planning to storm anything," I told them. "I'm planning to walk through the front gate and let Bastion decide exactly how this confrontation actually unfolds." That earned several skeptical expressions around our small fire, the particular silence that follows, someone proposing something considerably more reckless than anyone expected from careful planning. Senna finally broke the silence, asking the question everyone else apparently wanted answered first. Walking through the front gate as what exactly, a wolf or a king? Whatever the bloodline decides, I admitted honestly. I'm not entirely certain I control that transformation completely yet, regardless of how that confrontation with Krell actually went. Kor considered this carefully before nodding slowly, apparently deciding my uncertainty wasn't actually disqualifying given everything else we'd survived together over the past 2 years. We'll be right behind you either way, he said simply. The particular loyalty I'd once desperately wished for from someone who'd ultimately betrayed me completely instead. Drask's wolves would hold the outer farmland, preventing reinforcements from cutting off our retreat, while Kor, Senna, Yara, and Marin accompanied me directly toward the gate. We approached the main gate at midday, deliberately, openly. No attempt at stealth or shadow, just 5 wolves walking calmly toward soldiers already nervously watching us. The guards at the gate hesitated, weapons raised, but clearly uncertain whether engaging a group this size, moving this calmly, actually represented their safest available option. "We're not here to fight you," I called out, my voice carrying the same strange resonance it had during that confrontation with Krell days earlier on the ridge. "We're here to see the man currently sitting on a throne he stole," I continued, watching several guards exchange uneasy glances at words considerably more pointed than expected. One younger guard lowered his weapon slightly, studying my eyes with an expression I recognized immediately. The same careful recognition Krell had eventually shown days earlier himself. "You're him," he whispered, loud enough that several nearby guards clearly heard it too. "The White Wolf. My grandfather used to tell stories about your old reign. Word apparently traveled through the ranks faster than any officer could control, whispers spreading along the gate's defenses before any formal order could properly contain them." The gate captain finally stepped forward, older, weathered, carrying himself with the particular authority of someone who'd served considerably longer than Bastion's entire stolen reign combined. "Stand down," he ordered his men, surprising everyone, including, judging by his own expression, possibly even himself, given how quickly that decision had apparently arrived. "I served under King Edric Thal for 6 years before his death," the captain said quietly, addressing me directly, despite every obvious reason for skepticism still available. "I don't know what you actually are, but I know exactly what those eyes looked like during every single council meeting I personally attended as a young guard." He stepped aside slowly, gesturing his men to do the same, opening a path through the gate that nobody present had actually expected offered this easily. We walked through Ashvale's streets, surrounded by a silence that felt considerably heavier than any shouting could have managed, citizens watching from doorways and windows uncertainly. Some bowed slightly as we passed. Others simply stared, processing something their entire understanding of recent history apparently hadn't prepared them to witness directly themselves. Tomas the baker stepped out from his shop as we passed, flour still dusting his apron, his expression shifting rapidly from confusion toward something closer to recognition. He had promised the old king bread on his coronation day, he told nearby neighbors quietly, watching us pass. Maybe today he'd finally get the chance to deliver it properly. Word raced ahead of our small procession faster than we actually walked, crowds gathering cautiously along the route toward the palace, murmuring questions nobody seemed willing to answer confidently. Palace guards appeared eventually, considerably more organized than the gate's defenders had managed, forming a defensive line across the main courtyard with weapons drawn properly. Behind them, the palace doors opened slowly, and Bastion Vire himself stepped out, wearing the same stolen crown I'd last seen during that anniversary celebration weeks earlier. He looked older than I remembered, the particular weariness that comes from years spent maintaining power through fear, rather than anything resembling genuine, comfortable confidence. "So the rumors were true," he said, his voice carrying forced calm that didn't quite mask something considerably more uncertain, simmering visibly beneath his careful expression. "A wolf claiming royal lineage. Krell's report sounded considerably less impressive than whatever theater you're apparently planning for my own front courtyard this afternoon." "Theater implies something rehearsed, Bastion," I said, watching recognition flicker uncertainly across his face at hearing his own name spoken with that particular familiar tone. "This is considerably more honest than anything you've managed to offer this kingdom since the night your dagger found my ribs in our own throne room." Bastion's composure cracked visibly then, the careful mask slipping just enough to reveal something underneath that looked considerably closer to genuine fear than performed confidence. "Edric," he whispered, the name escaping before he apparently could stop it, confirming everything the gathering crowd had already started quietly suspecting for themselves, regardless. "That's impossible," he continued, louder now, recovering some composure. "You died. I made absolutely certain of that personally, with my own hands, my own blade. You made certain my body died," I corrected calmly. "You apparently didn't account for whatever this kingdom's own oldest legends actually intended for bloodlines like mine." The crowd gathered behind us murmured louder now, the particular sound of collective realization spreading through people who'd spent 2 years believing carefully constructed lies. "Guards!" Bastion shouted, his voice cracking slightly with something considerably less commanding, than the authority he'd apparently grown accustomed to wielding these past 2 years. The palace guards hesitated, weapons raised but clearly uncertain, watching their gate captain already kneeling quietly behind us instead of moving to defend the throne. Several lowered their weapons entirely, the particular collapse of authority that happens when soldiers realize the story justifying their orders has just publicly fallen apart. Bastion's eyes darted between his wavering guards and the growing crowd, calculating something with the particular desperation of a man watching control slip away completely. "If you wanted me dead," he said carefully, "you'd have killed me already instead of walking calmly through my own front gate giving speeches to my own people." "I'm not here to simply kill you, Bastion," I told him, feeling that familiar heat building steadily in my chest, though considerably more controlled than during previous encounters. "I'm here because this kingdom deserves to know exactly who built it, and exactly who's been lying to them about it for 2 entire stolen years." "Lies," he spat, some of his earlier confidence returning through pure, stubborn denial. "I gave this kingdom stability after your death, threw everything into chaos and confusion. You gave this kingdom fear, I corrected, dressed up carefully as stability. Ask any farmer whose village burned during your purges exactly how stable that actually felt." The crowd's murmuring grew louder still, several voices rising clearly enough now to be heard distinctly across the courtyard's increasingly tense, crowded silence. "My brother died fighting beside the old king," one voice called out. "We were told wolves killed him during a border skirmish, not during one of Bastion's purges." Another voice joined, then another. 2 years of carefully suppressed grievances, finally finding enough collective courage to surface openly in front of a stolen throne. Bastion's expression shifted from anger toward something closer to genuine panic, watching support he'd spent years carefully constructing crumble considerably faster than he'd ever anticipated. "Enough!" he shouted, drawing the same dagger I recognized instantly, the exact blade that had found my ribs in a throne room 2 long years earlier. "Whatever you are," he said, advancing despite his guards' visible reluctance to follow him forward, "you're still just an animal wearing a dead man's stolen memories." "That's considerably more conviction than you've shown since I arrived," I told him, the heat finally breaking fully loose, golden light spreading across my entire transforming form. My body shifted again, taller, broader, the hybrid shape I'd briefly held during Krell's confrontation now settling more completely, more naturally than it had managed before. Bastion hesitated, the dagger trembling slightly in a grip considerably less steady than the confident hand that had once driven it cleanly between my actual ribs. "You're afraid?" I said quietly, watching recognition and terror war visibly across a face I'd once trusted more than almost anyone else in my entire former life. "Good. Fear is apparently the only language you've genuinely understood for years now. Consider this simply you finally experiencing exactly what you've spent 2 years distributing freely." He lunged anyway, desperation overriding whatever remained of careful calculation. The dagger aimed exactly where it had landed successfully once already in a different lifetime entirely. I caught his wrist easily, considerably more easily than I expected, the strength flowing through this fully awakened form making his desperate strike feel almost gentle. The dagger clattered uselessly against courtyard stone. Bastion's wrist trapped firmly but carefully, no bones broken, no blood drawn, just complete, undeniable, humiliating restraint. "This is where it actually ends," I told him quietly, watching the fight, finally drained from eyes that had once smiled while watching me die in our own throne room. Not with another blade, not with more blood added to everything you've already spilled across this kingdom these past 2 years, but with the truth finally spoken openly. I released his wrist, stepping back deliberately, letting him stand there exposed in front of guards, nobles, and ordinary citizens who'd all just witnessed everything firsthand. "Bastion Vyre murdered King Edric Thal in his own throne room," I announced, my voice carrying clearly across a courtyard that had fallen completely, absolutely silent. He then built a campaign of fear against an entire bloodline, burning villages, displacing innocent families, all to hide a crime he apparently never expected confronted directly. The gate captain stood slowly, addressing the gathered crowd with considerably more authority than his earlier hesitant kneeling had initially suggested he actually possessed. "I witnessed enough tonight to formally request the council investigate these claims properly," he announced, his voice carrying the particular weight of genuine official conviction. Several other guards stepped forward too, lowering weapons entirely, the particular collapse of loyalty that happens when truth finally becomes considerably safer than continued careful silence. Bastion looked around desperately, searching for support that had apparently evaporated completely the moment his own carefully constructed lies finally met undeniable, public daylight. "This isn't over," he said weakly, though the words carried none of the threatening conviction they'd probably carried successfully during countless previous, considerably safer confrontations. "For you," I told him calmly, "I genuinely believe it actually is. Whatever happens next belongs to this kingdom's council, not to whatever desperate violence you're still considering." 2 palace guards stepped forward then, taking Bastion carefully into custody, his earlier commanding presence finally collapsing into something considerably smaller and far more human. The crowd watched in stunned, heavy silence as the man they'd feared for 2 entire years was led away, stripped of authority that had never genuinely belonged to him. As Bastion disappeared inside under careful guard, a different door opened, one leading toward the palace's private eastern garden where Leora reportedly walked every morning. She stepped out slowly, drawn by commotion impossible to ignore, her eyes immediately finding mine across a courtyard still processing everything that had just occurred. Leora stopped completely still, studying me with an intensity that made the heat in my chest stir again, though considerably more gently than during any actual confrontation. "It's you," she whispered, her voice carrying something between disbelief and a hope she'd apparently been carefully guarding against for 2 entire exhausting years alone. I didn't know how to properly answer that, standing in a body that wasn't fully wolf or fully man, in front of a wife who genuinely mourned a husband. "I'm sorry," I told her finally, the only honest words available given everything that had happened since a dagger had interrupted whatever life we'd actually built together. Leora crossed the courtyard slowly, stopping just close enough to study my eyes properly, searching for confirmation she apparently needed considerably more than careful explanation alone provided. "They're exactly the same," she said quietly, reaching out hesitantly before finally resting her hand gently against the side of my face the way she once had nightly. I felt that contact more deeply than almost anything else since waking up in that crowded den years earlier, 2 lifetimes briefly, impossibly touching across an impossible distance. "I thought you were gone forever," she said, her composure finally breaking into something rawer, more honest than the careful royal dignity she'd maintained throughout 2 difficult years. "I was, in most ways that actually matter," I told her gently. "Whatever I am now, I'm honestly not entirely certain it's the same man you originally married." Leora studied me carefully, processing that admission with the particular intelligence that had made her such a valuable advisor during my actual reign decades earlier. "Maybe not exactly," she said eventually, "but you're still here, still fighting for this kingdom, still apparently surrounded by people willing to follow you into genuine danger. That's considerably more than most men manage, dead or otherwise," she finished, something that looked remarkably close to genuine, gentle acceptance settling across her tired expression. A small figure pushed through the crowd, then Aldous, breaking away from whatever guard had been watching him, running directly toward the strange scene unfolding in the courtyard. He stopped a few careful feet away, studying me with the particular fearless curiosity children sometimes manage when adults around them are still too stunned to properly react. "You're the wolf from the celebration," he said, surprising everyone present, including, judging by her expression, even his own watchful, careful mother standing nearby. "You saw me that day?" I asked, genuinely startled that a child surrounded by guards had apparently noticed a brief golden flicker on a distant rooftop. "I felt something," he said simply, "the particular honesty children offer, before learning carefully to filter their own genuine instincts through adult caution and considered hesitation. Like, I already knew you somehow," he continued, reaching out slowly toward my face the same hesitant way his mother had moments earlier done herself. I let him touch my fur, watching Leora's breath catch slightly, watching guards and nobles alike witness something considerably more personal than the public confrontation moments earlier. Aldous studied my eyes carefully, the same intense focus I remembered using myself during important council meetings decades before he'd even existed in this world. "Are you my father?" he asked directly, with the particular bluntness only children manage successfully, cutting straight through complications adults would have spent considerably longer avoiding. "I'm honestly not entirely sure how to answer that properly," I told him gently, which felt like the only genuinely honest response available given everything that had changed. "I'm the wolf who remembers being your father," I continued carefully, watching that explanation settle slowly across a young face working hard to fully understand it. That seemed to satisfy him considerably more than I expected, his small hand resting comfortably against my fur, like he'd simply decided that explanation was perfectly acceptable. Leora watched this exchange with an expression I couldn't fully read, something between grief for what had been lost and quiet gratitude for whatever remained. The council convened within days, gathering evidence from guards, citizens, and eventually a considerably less defiant Bastion regarding exactly what had actually happened 2 years earlier. The investigation confirmed everything. Witnesses who'd seen guards mysteriously absent that night. Servants who'd noticed Bastion's strange behavior following my supposed death immediately afterward. Bastion Vire was formally stripped of his stolen title, the council deciding his fate through careful, considered process rather than through any further violence or bloodshed. I didn't attend that particular proceeding personally, finding myself considerably more interested in matters that actually mattered to me now than watching a fallen man's careful judgment. The council eventually offered me the throne back formally, an offer I considered carefully for several genuinely difficult days before finally reaching my own honest decision. I'm not the king this kingdom actually needs anymore, I told them eventually. Whatever I've become, it belongs considerably more to forests than to throne rooms now. Instead, I suggested something the council apparently hadn't fully considered, Leora ruling as regent until Aldous came properly of age, guided by considerably better advisors. Aldous would inherit the throne eventually, raised this time with truth instead of lies, with his actual father's memory honored rather than carefully erased from history. As for me, I returned to Greymore eventually, though not entirely the same way I'd originally left it weeks earlier with 5 nervous wolves and considerable uncertainty. Kor stayed beside me, exactly as he'd promised that night beside our first relocated cave, loyalty that had grown into something considerably stronger than simple obligation. Senna remained too, of course, the same steady presence she'd offered since that very first crowded litter, where she'd been the only one willing to share food. Yara returned to teaching, though her lessons now included considerably more direct mentions of legends she'd apparently been careful about revealing too quickly years earlier. Marin finally allowed herself to simply rest, watching her son settle into whatever strange new role the kingdom and the forest had both apparently decided he occupied. Drask's pack remained close allies too, the Eastern Ridge arrangement evolving into something considerably more permanent than either of us had originally anticipated during that first tense parley. Krell himself returned eventually too, formally resigning his position as Huntmaster before requesting something considerably more unusual from the newly formed council. He wanted to help dismantle the very purge system he'd spent years personally enforcing, starting with locating and compensating every family displaced by Bastion's campaigns. "I'm not asking forgiveness," he told me directly during one of my rare visits to the capital, just the chance to actually fix something instead of breaking it. I respected that considerably more than I expected to. Watching a man who'd once hunted me with trained hounds slowly becoming something closer to genuinely useful penance. The hounds themselves, retired from tracking duty, eventually found homes scattered across farms that had once feared every distant howl echoing through their fields. Drask's pack helped too, more than anyone originally expected, sharing old forest knowledge that helped relocate several displaced packs back toward territories Bastion's purges had emptied. Slowly, painfully, the kingdom started healing in ways that felt considerably more genuine than Bastion's careful, fear-built version of stability ever actually managed achieving. Leora proved a considerably better regent than anyone, including herself, had originally expected, governing through the same careful honesty she'd always quietly valued during my own reign. She visited Greymore occasionally, too, bringing Aldous, sitting with Marin and Yara, discussing matters considerably less complicated than thrones, treaties, or stolen, contested crowns. Watching her laugh genuinely again, something I hadn't witnessed since long before a dagger had interrupted whatever peaceful life we'd once carefully built together, settled something old and tired inside me. I never fully understood everything this bloodline actually was, even afterward, though Yara's old legends apparently came considerably closer to truth than any court scholar ever managed. What I understood clearly, watching Kor teach younger pups the same patience lessons he'd once learned reluctantly himself, was that kingdoms come in considerably more shapes than thrones. Some kingdoms are built from stone and treaties. Others apparently are built from loyalty, patience, and a found family willing to walk straight toward danger together. I'd lost an actual throne once, betrayed by someone I'd trusted completely with absolutely everything that mattered to me during that entire, previous, complicated lifetime. What I'd gained instead felt considerably harder to lose, built slowly through 2 genuinely difficult years, rather than handed down through simple, convenient royal birthright alone. Senna found me one evening on the same ridge where I'd once stared south toward walls I no longer needed conquering, settling beside me the familiar, easy way. Regretting any of it, she asked quietly, watching the same distant smoke rising from chimneys that had once represented everything I'd lost and desperately wanted reclaimed. Not anymore, I told her honestly, and meant it considerably more completely than I expected given everything that particular admission actually represented after 2 difficult years. I lost a throne, a name, and an entire previous life. What I found instead turned out considerably more valuable than anything that stolen crown ever genuinely offered me. She smiled at that, the particular smile that had first appeared sharing scraps in a crowded den years earlier before either of us understood what that small kindness would eventually become. "Whatever happens next," she said, watching the forest stretch endlessly beyond our ridge in every comfortable direction, "I suspect it's still going to be considerably interesting." "It usually is," I admitted, feeling that familiar warmth settle through my chest, considerably gentler now than the golden heat had ever managed during any actual confrontation. The kingdom that once hunted me had been built, brick by careful brick, by exactly the same hands now resting comfortably in fur instead of stolen royal gloves. Bastion had tried erasing that history completely, convinced fear could permanently replace memory, never once considering that some bloodlines simply refuse staying buried forever underground. I'd been reborn a runt nobody wanted, hunted by a kingdom built from my own stubborn legacy, and somehow found my way back to exactly where I belonged anyway. Not on a throne, not wearing a crown, just here, on this ridge, surrounded by a pack that had chosen me considerably more completely than any birthright ever could. That, I decided finally, watching the sun finally set properly over forests I'd once protected as a man, and now protected as something else entirely, was more than enough. The White Wolf King hadn't simply returned to reclaim a stolen throne. He'd found something considerably better waiting patiently the entire time, hidden inside an ordinary overlooked litter. And honestly, looking back across everything that had happened since that first cold night waking up blind and helpless, I wouldn't have changed a single difficult moment of it. So tell me honestly, would you have given up the throne too, or held on to it? Let me know below, and thanks for sticking with this one all the way to the end.